Chapter 596. Outside the radiant city of death, there were mountains of corpses. Chu Feng didn't know how many days and nights he had been standing here. From time to time, he would stretch his body, unleash his fist intent, and display his spiritual arts. He was using the boundless pressure here to refine his body, tempering his breathing technique, corporeal martial arts, and spiritual abilities. It was like a baptism. He was in a special environment and would occasionally comprehend something. That was because there were ancient fist imprints, sharp sword intents that could tear the starry skies, spear chi that could pierce through the universe, and the trajectory of a giant axe that could split open the sky. It was hard to imagine what kind of experts had come from here. It was simply unfathomable. That was because every time Chu Feng came into contact with a terrifying fist intent, saber intent, or a heavenly dagger axe that could split the starry skies, he would hear the breathing of an ancient existence. It was ridiculously powerful and excessively terrifying. It was as if these individuals could cover the sky with one hand. Just like that, Chu Feng comprehended and tempered himself here. He constantly stretched his limbs and used his spiritual power to immerse himself in a wondrous state. He didn't obtain a specific method but only came into contact with various intent. This was enough to promote his progress and was like endless nourishment that could be absorbed. After several days, Chu Feng discovered that he had undergone great changes. His understanding of corporeal martial arts and spiritual battle had increased by a large margin. It could be said that he had advanced by leaps and bounds. Only a few days had passed, and he had already obtained such a harvest. Chu Feng believed that if he could comprehend and temper himself here for a long time, he might undergo a qualitative transformation. He was trying to circulate the robbery induction breathing technique, hoping to grasp the specific method through the remnant fist intent and spiritual intents here. This would further strengthen his body and allow him to be reborn. However, he couldn't succeed for the time being. There were all kinds of spiritual imprints and martial Tao trajectories in this area. It could be considered a heavenly paradise for an evolver to comprehend and absorb nourishment. In the end, he might even break out of his cocoon and become a butterfly. This wasn't just a wretched land or a city of death. It was also the supreme temple of evolvers. Of course, the prerequisite was that one could survive here in order to experience all of this. Normally speaking, other living beings wouldn't have any life left after arriving here. They would have long since been torn to shreds and turned into a bloody pulp. If they were strong enough, they would leave behind a complete corpse. Chu Feng had the stone box on him, which was why he was able to survive and maintain his life force. After comprehending for a few days, he felt mentally exhausted. Moreover, his body was already injured. When he entered this space, dozens of his bones were broken. Although his bones were connected and his flesh had healed, he was still a little tired from comprehending the Tao here. Chu Feng rested and took out some food from the spatial bottle. He swallowed it in large mouthfuls to replenish his body's needs. This was the advantage of being a glutton. The heavenly deity meat and various other delicacies that he had left behind earlier could now be put to good use. Otherwise, even though he wouldn't starve to death in a short period of time, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand the hunger. For the injured, these were all beneficial supplements. In addition, he had captured so many divine sons and robbed Qin Luoyin at the last moment. Naturally, Chu Feng had all kinds of treasured medicines and spirit pills on him. Chu Feng had already taken some earlier. Now it was as if he was eating jelly beans. He poured out a large handful and stuffed them into his mouth, chewing noisily. If someone were here, they would definitely be distressed and feel that he was wasting natural resources recklessly. This was a classic example of a cow chewing on a peony. The effects were astonishing. After eating treasured medicines and jelly beans like this several times, Chu Feng's body and spirit were both in good shape. The blood energy in his body was at its peak, and the flames of his spirit were pulsating. so much so that he felt a little overnourished. At this moment Chu Feng sighed. It was really good to be born in a top-notch orthodoxy in the starry skies. The spatial bracelet he carried with him was simply too abundant. After eating the medicinal liquids and treasured pills left behind by Qin Luoyin, his body was full of vitality and had completely recovered. Moreover, his strength had become even stronger because he had comprehended various fist intense and spiritual arts imprints. I wonder how Qin Luoyin is doing? Chu Feng muttered to himself. He believed that if the other party was still alive, she would definitely be able to discover this mysterious city that was exceptionally resplendent in the darkness. Because it was too special, it was like the only torch in the dark night. But he was also clear that if there were no accidents, the other party wouldn't be able to get close. At most, she would only be able to watch from a few hundred kilometers away. If she were to charge in forcefully, she would undoubtedly die. Both her body and soul would be destroyed. With his body and spirit fully recovered and finally surpassing his peak, Chu Feng's body was strong and full of vitality. He comprehended for a few more days and couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to enter the city to take a look. If it was like this outside the city, then what was inside? In the end, Chu Feng moved. He decided to enter the city and explore. The reason why he was so confident was because he had the stone box on him that could protect him. Even a golden arhat would be destroyed, and even a bodhisattva wouldn't necessarily be unscathed. However, this stone box was very strange and miraculous. It could actually protect Chu Feng from harm. This was his greatest reliance at the moment. Back when he picked up this item at the foot of Mount Kunlun, he had never imagined that it would be so extraordinary one day. Now it seemed quite odd. Chu Feng saw too many races as he stepped on the mountains and seas of ancient corpses and walked through the land of blood. He discovered that he didn't recognize more than 90% of them. They were all new species to him, so much so that he was a bit suspicious. Were they creatures from this universe? He had learned about the races in the starry skies from the photon computer and had seen many powerful races. However, he was still unfamiliar with the large number of corpses here. From his point of view, this city was like hell. It contained the corpses of creatures from the starry skies and even from the outer realms. Earth's forebears might have been exiled here and killed countless times, but that's only a portion of the dead. Chu Feng frowned. He arrived at the foot of the city. During this process, he saw some corpses from ancient times on Earth. They matched the race's appearance and attire according to the record. The majestic city walls were very tall. The walls were originally piled up with huge stones and looked very simple and old. However, they had once been soaked in blood and were now stained with a scarlet color. The entire city was stained with blood, but it blossomed with dazzling radiance. It was very tall, and the walls were like a mountain ridge stretching across the land. It was imposing, majestic, and ancient. Chu Feng frowned. He couldn't fly in this space and could only climb up. He observed for a while and confirmed that there were no killing domains. Then, he slithered along the coarse walls like a giant gecko and climbed all the way up. He frowned as he sensed the accumulated aura of time on the walls. If he had to give an age, he felt that this city had existed since the creation of the world. The walls were too ancient. The marks of time seemed to originate from the end of the river of time. Chu Feng tried to leave a mark on the wall, but he couldn't move it no matter what methods he used. These stones were very large, rough, and looked ordinary. However, he couldn't even leave a scratch on them despite his strength far exceeding that of other visualization realm evolvers. What kind of stone material was this? It was inconceivably hard. If he were to bring out a large piece, it would probably be considered a precious material by some of the great sects in the starry skies. However, these stones looked very ordinary on the surface. Finally, Chu Feng climbed up the city walls and surveyed the scene in the city from a distance. In just a split second, His entire body stiffened and tensed up. His pupils dilated and contracted as he stared fixedly at the scenery in the city. This was an ancient city capable of accommodating millions of people. The scale wasn't too excessive, but it couldn't be considered small either. The city was densely packed with corpses everywhere, almost drowning the entire city. They were as tall as the city walls, and all of them were emitting terrifying auras and bursting forth with soaring radiance. Doubtlessly, they were all experts. Even though Chu Feng was mentally prepared, he was still greatly astonished and incomparably shaken. There were countless corpses of experts all over the city. Just how many creatures had been killed? The corpses occupied a third of the city, and the other third was empty land. The last area shocked Chu Feng the most. It was also the reason why his body was stiff. At the center of the city, there was a giant millstone made of coarse stone. It was incomparably large and occupied one of the 3 areas of the ancient city. It was hard to imagine who had polished such a millstone. It was still slowly rotating, as if it had been like this since ancient times and had never stopped. Chu Feng's scalp went numb. A layer of goosebumps appeared all over his body, and all his hair stood on end. He saw a terrifying scene. The corpses in the city were carried up by an inexplicable force from time to time, landing on the millstone. They fell into the holes on the millstone and were then crushed to pieces. No one dared to look at the scene there. It was too terrifying. One could feel an unimaginably powerful battle intent and spiritual obsession being obliterated, turned into pure spiritual seeds. In addition, the corpses also contained a terrifying power. Each and every one of them was very powerful when they were alive, but now they were easily crushed. Blood flowed out, accompanied by the most fundamental energy. Everything was ground to pieces, from the corpses to the spirit, returning to the origin. That giant millstone was like a precise instrument. It had never stopped since ancient times, always operating to deal with the endless corpses. Its efficiency was extremely high. Not long after, the sea of corpses in the city was almost completely wiped out. Suddenly, countless corpses fell down like dumplings in midair, piling up in the city, filling up a third of the city in an instant. The replenishment had been completed. They were just like the city, all shining. The energy within their bodies was terrifyingly rich. They were all formidable experts when they were alive. Where did these corpses come from? There were too many of them, continuously crushed by the giant millstone. This seemed like a type of daily work. It was too strange and too terrifying. Sure enough, after a period of time, the corpses were completely consumed. Mountains of corpses fell from the void, piling up a third of the city. Chu Feng was shaken. Had it always been like this since ancient times? The millstone was like an infallible instrument, always operating. Just how many corpses had it crushed from ancient times until now? He stared at those corpses. Some had died from injuries and were very miserable, but some corpses were as good as before, as if they had died of old age. In the end, all of them appeared here. Chu Feng observed carefully. Some of the corpses were vivid and lifelike, as if they had died not long ago. At the same time, he also noticed that there were corpses of saints among them. In the end, after falling into the millstone, they were similarly crushed and turned into a bloody paste. In the end, they were broken down into the most fundamental energy and returned to heaven and earth. One had to know that the bodies of saints were immortal even after death. It was very difficult to destroy them, even more difficult than destroying a planet. In the end, they directly disintegrated after falling into the millstone. So much so that Chu Feng even saw half of the vermilion bird's body. It was completely obliterated, and divine blood splattered everywhere as it returned to its origin. In addition, the bitter resentment and powerful obsessions in this area were still boiling a second ago, but in the next second, they were completely eliminated and purified by the millstone. Chu Feng had a feeling that the millstone was like a place of rebirth, sending people into reincarnation. This was because he had indeed seen some spiritual seeds left behind after the resentment and obsessions had been obliterated. After watching for a long time, he had a feeling that everything would come to an end at the end of the reincarnation cycle. The past glory and brilliance of his previous life would all be ground to dust and would never be seen again. Chu Feng walked along the city walls and circled around the city to observe. In the end, he saw the scenery on the other side of the crude millstone. He was completely shaken, and his body and spirit trembled. His previous observations and experience weren't wrong. All the corpses had been ground to pieces, turned into a bloody paste, and then disintegrated into energy. Only a few spiritual seeds with all their imprints erased were left behind. Moreover, they were very weak and not powerful. There was a blurry road on the other side of the millstone. All the spiritual seeds that had been obliterated and left behind were blurry shadows. After coming out of the millstone, they were following that road into the unknown depths of the mist. That road seemed to be connected to another world. This is the final destination of all spirits? For a moment, Chu Feng felt his hair stand on end. Chapter 597. This place was too bizarre. The gigantic millstone was rotating slowly, and even the immortal corpses of saints, which would not break even after being struck by a planet, were easily crushed by the millstone. They turned into a bloody pulp and finally disintegrated into energy. Just what was the origin of this crude stone millstone? It was unimaginable. Of course, Chu Feng did not have the time to think so much. He was currently being pulled, and was about to be thrown onto the millstone. He felt that he had really been too rash. Previously, with the protection of the stone box, he had not been strangled by the murderous aura and saint blood energy outside the city. But it was different here. He could not help but float up. There was a kind of power moving the corpses in the city, and even he himself appeared in the air. Then, they flew toward the millstone together. No! Chu Feng cried out strangely. At the juncture of life and death, he resisted with all his might, but it was useless. He thought that with the stone box in hand, he could safely enter and leave this land of death. But reality had taught him that excessive curiosity could kill him. There was no medicine for regret. In midair, large numbers of corpses were moved to the top of the millstone. There were tens of millions of them, densely packed. Some were as small as ants, some as large as golden pings, and there were many different races. They fell down like dumplings. There were so many in one go, and then they all smashed onto the millstone again. There was a hole on the millstone. Generally speaking, ordinary millstones would grind grains through this hole and use 2 millstones to grind the seeds into slurry or fine powder. But now it was the corpses that were being crushed. This scene was too terrifying, and Chu Feng was experiencing it himself. He felt goosebumps all over his body, and he felt as if he had been electrocuted from head to toe. There were millions of corpses on the gigantic millstone, as well as some plants. Now, they were attracted by a strange energy and fell into the hole. Chu Feng was experiencing it himself, so he was naturally deeply affected. A mysterious vortex appeared in the hole in the millstone, sucking him and the countless corpses into it. He could only watch helplessly as the corpses that had fallen in earlier were crushed into meat paste. Blood splashed into the air. It was an indescribable feeling. Calling it horrifying was far from enough. When it was his turn to fall, he happened to see a golden bodhisattva in a pile of corpses. Before his death, the golden bodhisattva looked solemn and dignified, still exuding a strong vitality. However, after falling in, he was no different from the other corpses. With a poof, golden blood sprayed high up and almost splashed onto Chu Feng's body. It made his scalp go numb, and cold air rushed into the top of his skull. F***ck. Chu Feng was truly frightened. He felt that life was extremely terrifying. He was going to die, and it was going to be a miserable death. It was going to be incomparably miserable, and he was going to be dismembered. His heart went cold. Rather than that, it would be better for him to slit his own throat and avoid suffering. However, as soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he gave up on it. If he chose to die, it would be too unchallenging, because no matter how he looked at it, he would definitely die. If he chose to live, the difficulty would be too great. For this reason, he chose the difficult latter. I have to live, Chu Feng cried out strangely. Then, he stared blankly at the corpse that seemed to be half a true phoenix. Its entire body was brilliant, and it emitted a rich aura that was terrifying to the heavens. The immortal mist and divine splendor that filled the air naturally leaked outwards. Even with the protection of the stone box, he still felt pain all over his body at such a close distance. It was as if he was about to break apart. He was convinced that if he didn't have the stone box, he would directly explode and turn into a bloody mist when he approached the corpse that seemed to be the phoenix of immortality. The energy contained within the corpse was too terrifying. Even so, this divine bird with brightly colored wings, white mist, and immortal light was still crushed into a bloody pulp by the stone millstone. Chu Feng quivered and shivered. His soul was frightened and his spirit was shaken. It was difficult to guess the realm of that divine bird, and he didn't know how powerful it was. Are you trying to scare me? This grandpa is here, and I'm going to walk on the path of reincarnation. 18 years is too far, and I'll become an adult at 14. I'll still be a good man. I swear that after I capture so many saintesses in my next life, I'll go first. Ayo, damn your grandpa, let me finish, motherf asterisk cur, ah. Chu Feng was smashed into the millstone's hole and fell into the whirlpool. He saw many bone dregs. Some were golden and some were fiery red. They were suffused with immortal energy and hadn't completely disappeared yet. Of course, there were also many golden Arhat-level creatures in the surroundings. They were simply crushed as soon as they fell in, and blood blossomed one after another. It was so dazzling that it made one experience the pinnacle of this world. It was too terrifying, and Chu Feng was drenched in blood until his hair stood on end. After experiencing this kind of bitterness at such a close distance, the shadow in Chu Feng's heart was simply boundless. Damn your grandpa, I'm coming! Chu Feng shouted. He couldn't resist at all, and just like that, he was sucked in between the blood and bone dregs, receiving the crushing of the two millstones. Blood splashed in all directions. Chu Feng's loud shout shook this radiant city of death. He was the only creature that could make a sound, because everyone else was dead, and only he was alive. He didn't close his eyes, but rather opened them wide. He was throwing caution to the wind and wanted to see how he would die, how miserable it would be. Blood splashed in all directions, but he discovered that he hadn't been crushed and was still alive. At this time, his chest area was faintly glowing. The stone box there had protected him at the last moment. What was going on? Chu Feng's eyes widened. He didn't die, and he could still survive in this kind of danger zone? Upon closer inspection, although the blood and bone dregs were surging over, they actually didn't touch his body. They were separated from him by a layer of light. Chu Feng discovered that the stone box's reaction was intense here. It was becoming more and more special. After he took it out, he saw the luster spreading from the previously sparkling corners. Afterwards, Chu Feng rotated along with the millstone. There was a bizarre domain here that seemed to distort space. It ensured that Chu Feng wouldn't be crushed and wouldn't die between the two millstones. At this moment, Chu Feng didn't die. This kind of experience was simply refreshing. The blood and bone dregs of various colors were whistling through the air like a mudslide. Just like that, he received wave after wave of baptism. He had seen all kinds of disgusting flesh and blood. Even someone as tough as him felt the urge to vomit. Prong claws, vicious monkey heads, jade-white elephant trunks, phoenix wings, and even flood dragon bone marrow. He seemed to have vaguely seen them all. He could only watch helplessly as they turned into mush. Chu Feng swore that if he could escape this place, he would never eat them again. He simply wanted to vomit after seeing those so-called precious ingredients mashed together and stirred continuously. This is intentional, isn't it? From now on, I'll lose one of the greatest pleasures in life. I still wanted to taste all the delicacies in the world, but now I want to vomit after seeing this. Chu Feng couldn't move. Although he wasn't dead, he still couldn't leave this place. He followed the millstone's rotation, round and round. He watched as the other entities were crushed and blood splattered in all directions. During this process, Chu Feng made an astonishing discovery. He stared fixedly at the millstone and activated his fiery eyes. He wanted to observe everything clearly and in detail. As the millstone rotated, the hardest bone dregs emitted a faint light and rushed to the millstone. For example, the hardest bone of the divine bird that was suspected to be the immortal bird emitted this kind of faint light. Even saints wouldn't emit such light after being crushed. Soon after, he made an important discovery. There were some characters within the millstone, and the flying light entered them. Chu Feng's pupils constricted. He realized that this was a peerless treasure. Only a divine bird like the immortal bird could fly up and enter it to become part of it. This was absolutely heaven-defying. Upon closer inspection, he found that it was a row of golden characters. There were only a few dozen of them, but they were glistening brightly. They appeared incomparably divine in this bloody place. Chu Feng's eyes burned even more fiercely. His golden eyes were spewing out flames. He wanted to see clearly and memorize the golden characters within the millstone. Then, he let out a blood-curdling scream. His eyes were in intense pain, and he quickly closed them. Tears of blood flowed out from the corners of his eyes. These characters were too extraordinary. They were like taboo things that couldn't be peeked at. Chu Feng was shaken. Just what was it? He really wanted it. Could it be that there was a scripture within the millstone? He didn't know how heaven-defying it was, but it seemed that there were only a few dozen characters. It was too short. After a long while, Chu Feng opened his eyes. He was still in pain, but fortunately, his eyes weren't destroyed. 2 streams of blood flowed out. It was truly dangerous just now. Afterward, Chu Feng extended out a wisp of his divine sense. He was very cautious and wanted to continue observing. In the end, his spirit was almost scattered with a loud boom. His entire body trembled and his mind went blank. He stood there in a daze for a long time. It was simply too dangerous. He had only probed out a wisp of his spirit, but he was almost obliterated here. Peerlessly terrifying. Chu Feng had a premonition that he had come into contact with the most important item here. This was a great secret that couldn't be leaked. Once he tried to figure it out, it would be a fatal disaster. He brought out a bottle of medicinal liquid. This originally belonged to Qin Luoyin and could be used to treat spiritual injuries. Fortunately, although he was almost obliterated, the stone box protected him at the critical moment and prevented him from being seriously injured. As such, he recovered after drinking the medicinal liquid. Afterward, Chu Feng discovered that the stone box was changing. The crystalline patterns on the corners were spreading out and, in the end, the entire surface became transparent with patterns forming a diagram. In the blink of an eye, Chu Feng came to a realization. He had completely understood that all the abnormalities in the stone box were related to this place. Only after entering the radiant city of death did he come into contact with the source of the stone box's abnormalities. Afterward, Chu Feng discovered that a mountain and river diagram containing dozens of golden specks of light had appeared on one of the intact surfaces of the stone box. He became increasingly cautious as he activated his fiery eyes and stared at this side of the stone box. Afterward, he discovered that the dozens of golden specks of light were incomparably complicated and glaring runes. They seemed to be the same as the dozens of runes on the millstone? Chu Feng was dumbfounded. Had the stone box imitated the heaven-defying runes on the millstone? Or could it be that the stone box's surface already had them and was only appearing now because of the resonance? He didn't know. Chapter 598. The mountain and river diagram on the stone box was majestic and magnificent. At first, Chu Feng didn't notice anything, but after careful observation, he was shocked out of his wits. He was completely dumbfounded and began to doubt his life. That was because he was investigating with the eyes of a domain researcher. This terrain was too mysterious. It seized the beauty of the heaven and earth and contained an unprecedented strangeness. For instance, he saw a corner of the area that was actually the crouching phoenix terrain. It was as if a true phoenix was lying there and laying eggs with great difficulty. However, it clashed with the terrain and died here, leaving behind an immortal egg. This kind of terrain was too heaven-defying. An immortal bird had died, and there should be a torrential aura of resentment and death. However, there was also a newborn life form waiting to return from nirvana and nurturing a dense vitality. That terrain was abnormally complex and required deep contemplation to study a thing or two. Even though Chu Feng had long since become a domain master, he still couldn't see through it in a short time. And the so-called crouching phoenix terrain was only a corner of the stone box. Relatively speaking, there was a large area of mountains and rivers, and the layout was rarely seen since ancient times. For instance, Chu Feng glanced at a random corner and found a flaming cavern there. However, after careful observation, he realized that this wasn't a cavern at all. Combined with the surrounding terrain, this was the true revered 8 trigrams furnace. Chu Feng was shaken quite badly. No one knew better than him how heaven-defying this was. What was the revered 8 trigrams furnace? It could be used to refine ultimate weapons and nurture immortal medicines. It was a place that seized the fortune of heaven and earth. Where did Chu Feng's fiery eyes come from? It was opened in a small imitation of the revered 8 trigrams furnace. At Mount Zhijin in Jiangning, there was a small furnace that someone had set up. Chu Feng had previously called it the revered 8 trigrams furnace, but he knew that it was only a knockoff. It had been set up by someone and was very small in scale. Compared to the real revered 8 trigrams furnace, it was several orders of magnitude lower. They weren't even on the same level. How could Chu Feng not be shocked when he saw these two kinds of terrain after a casual glance? That was because this kind of ultimate terrain only existed in legends and couldn't be seen in reality. Once this type of terrain was formed, the planet it resided on would be impervious to all tribulations. It would nurture unmatched opportunities or mysteries, its depths unfathomable. But Chu Feng was actually able to see these two ultimate terrains in 2 corners of a mountain range. How could he not be shocked? One had to know that even the sage master, who had left behind so many books on domains on the moon, as well as a peerless inheritance like the silver paper, only briefly mentioned those ultimate terrains and didn't go into detail. One could imagine that even if a sacred expert came, he would still be shocked. Then, out of curiosity, Chu Feng took another look. In an adjacent area, he discovered the Zhu Xian terrain and the corpse-nurturing land, which made him horrified. The stone surface on the stone box was too heaven-defying. With a casual glance, one would discover a unique and terrifying terrain that could shock both ancient and modern times. It was just a small stone surface, yet the mountains and rivers on it were so terrifying. Just how many types of ultimate terrains did it contain? Moreover, these ultimate terrains were actually all together in the same picture. Chu Feng glanced at it a few more times. He simply couldn't understand some of the terrains. With his current attainments in the field of domains, he couldn't even recognize them, let alone decipher them. Not to mention the central area, even the areas slightly closer to the center were confusing to him. He clearly knew that they were extraordinary and were ultimate terrains, but he just couldn't recognize them. Chu Feng drew in a breath of cold air. At first, he hadn't paid much attention to the mountain and river diagram on the stone box. He was only paying attention to the tadpole patterns, but now he was stunned. This so-called mountain and river diagram couldn't even be described as heaven-defying. Even now, he was somewhat doubting life. Was what he was seeing real? How could there be such a place in the world? He reckoned that even the top 10 planets wouldn't have such a terrain. So much so that he believed that it was difficult for any place in the universe to have 2 or more ultimate terrains at the same time. They should be separated. The dozens of heaven-defying golden symbols on the millstone had now appeared on the stone box in addition to this mountain and river diagram. This caused Chu Feng's hair to stand on end. This was the first time he realized that the stone box was far more important and mysterious than he had imagined. After a long time, Chu Feng came back to his senses. Then, reality once again taught him how miserable he was now. The giant stone millstone spun, crushing millions of corpses every time. Chu Feng followed it as it spun. He witnessed the whole process and came into close contact with it. There was only a layer of light separating them, but the shadow in his heart was boundless. In the end, millions of corpses had already been ground into a bloody pulp and turned into a viscous liquid that flowed along the edge of the millstone. Chu Feng also fell down. With a plop, he fell below as if he were diving. For a moment, muddy water splattered in all directions. There was no need to mention how terrifying this feeling was. Even someone with thick nerves would want to retch. This place was like a lake of corpse mud and blood. Then, he saw these things decomposing and turning into incomparably dense energy that drifted between heaven and earth. Chu Feng was practically in a mess in the wind. Could it be that the energy he normally absorbed came from this? He told himself that it was impossible. Otherwise, he would want to vomit even more. In the end, he drifted along until he reached the place where the blood had dried up. Spiritual seeds appeared one after another. There were no imprints inside. They were all blank. After being crushed by the millstone, the spiritual imprints, undying obsessions, and monstrous resentment left in these corpses were all cleanly purified. It was as if a disc had been formatted and nothing was left behind. Then Chu Feng saw many illusory figures. They were all spiritual bodies, as if their souls had left their bodies. They were at a loss and walked in a certain direction. In one direction of the millstone there was an ancient road. It was very quiet and also very strange. It attracted all the spiritual bodies along the way as if it was summoning them to reincarnate. Don't tell me that reincarnation really exists in this world, and that one can really be reborn? Chu Feng had never believed it, but the current experience had somewhat overturned his 3 views. In particular, he had seen the process of the millstone working with his own eyes. This was simply a sophisticated and magnificent instrument that was performing the functions of the underworld. Chu Feng gritted his teeth. He followed these spiritual bodies all the way forward, wanting to see where they were going and how they were going to reincarnate. In any case, he had already come this far. It didn't matter if he walked a few more steps. This was how he convinced himself. He was really too curious because this wasn't an ordinary little secret, but the ultimate secret of life that humans and all living things had always suspected and discussed since ancient times. And as long as he walked forward along this road, he would be able to clearly understand it. Therefore, Chu Feng couldn't help but suppress his curiosity. He followed along. Among the group of spiritual bodies that had lost their will and imprints, he was special. He was the only living creature with flesh and blood mixed in with them. This ancient road was very long. After passing through a place similar to a realm gate, it seemed like they had entered another world. Chu Feng gritted his teeth and finally followed in. Where was this? He looked around. The sky and earth were dusky. He couldn't see the sun or the earth. They seemed to be stepping on a layer of dim energy matter. He turned back and saw a long line behind him, followed by a sea of spiritual bodies. Looking forward, he also couldn't see the end of it at a glance. It was like a group of reincarnated armies were queuing up to advance to the end of their destiny. What the hell? Chu Feng felt his hair stand on end. But after thinking about it carefully, he really was mixed in with a group of ghosts. He had to queue up to reach the prearranged end of his destiny. Bang! He felt someone colliding into him from behind with great force, causing him to stagger. He turned back and saw a monster with 9 big mouths open. It was extremely terrifying, but it was also in a spiritual state. It had no flesh and blood and was very fierce. Chu Feng was deeply surprised. He felt that this monster wasn't simple. There was still a bit of vague spiritual nature left behind. It had no memories and only fierceness was left behind. It could only be said that this creature was too fierce when it was alive and was still so after death. However, he had never seen this race before. The 9 big mouths covered its whole body and didn't grow 9 heads. Chu Feng glared and said, "Why are you so fierce? Why did you bump into me? Are you in a hurry to reincarnate?" After that, he was also speechless. This thing seemed to really be in a hurry to reincarnate. "Do you know you have to queue up?" Chu Feng cast a sidelong glance at it. Fortunately, this monster didn't have a true consciousness and was only left with some kind of instinct. One look and he knew that it was monstrous when it was alive. Passing through this dusky area, Chu Feng followed this long dragon-like army of spirit bodies. As he walked, he actually entered a starry sky. This surprised him. Was he really going to reincarnate? As he looked up, he saw a sky full of stars. Looking around, it was empty. Occasionally, he would see meteorites floating in the air. Such a group of spirit bodies was walking. Just their team alone had millions of them. This was really strange. Where were they going? Chu Feng was silent and just followed like that. He felt that he should still be able to find a way back. That was because under their feet, it wasn't completely void but a road paved with black stones. There were many livor mortis-like bloodstains on it. It was very strange and slightly eerie. A group of dead people and a group of formatted spirit. It was a majestic and spectacular sight. Just like that, they crossed the starry sky and went all the way to an unknown place. This was a prearranged path. This was their predestined path. Chu Feng increasingly wanted to find out how to reincarnate, how to be reborn, and where exactly was their final destination. Is this really the path of reincarnation? Afterward, Chu Feng was a little suspicious. After all, he had seen the starry sky. However, the huge stone millstone he had seen earlier was very strange. It seemed to be carrying out the order of reincarnation and sending people to the afterlife. For a moment, he was a little puzzled. Was this the real path of reincarnation, or was it controlled by someone? If it was the latter, it was even more terrifying. This group of dead people has been formatted. I'm the only one left alive. I'm so weird. Don't let anything strange happen when the time comes. Chu Feng's imagination ran wild. He was a little unsure of what would happen next. However, since he had already set off, he had no other choice. Afterward, Chu Feng's heart stirred. Was this the real starry sky? Was this still the universe he was originally in? If that was the case, perhaps he could call the heaven-piercing express company and have them pack him up and mail him back to Earth. Chapter 599. Wormhole Express. Damn your grandpa, how unreliable. What happened to the Platinum VIP service? What a scam. Why are you ignoring me? In the starry sky, within a large group of ghosts, one of them was particularly different. He was acting sneakily like the other spirits, pretending to hurry on with his journey. At the same time, he was busy with his work, secretly taking out his photon computer to contact the outside world. You're still talking about expanding your business to the broken universe in the primal chaos? I'm telling you, I want to file a complaint. Your Cosmic Express Company is too unreliable. Chu Feng lowered his voice to express his dissatisfaction. But then, his eyes went blank. There was no signal from the photon computer. Was it because of the Wormhole Express Company? Oh no. At this moment, he felt a headache. Could it be that this part of the starry sky wasn't in the original universe? This made him nervous. He had previously thought of the worst, but when it came true, he was dumbfounded and felt a chill run down his spine. Perhaps this area is too barren and the interstellar network doesn't cover this area, just like Earth in the past. Chu Feng frowned and muttered to himself. That was because he knew that the interstellar network had no signal at the edge of the universe. For example, on planets with powerful barbarian gods, it was strongly resisted. That kind of civilization was definitely biased toward the evolution of gods and demons and didn't approve of technology. The more Chu Feng thought about it, the more he felt that he was still in the original universe. It was just that this area was too barren. If even the interstellar network could cover this area, then the fact that so many spirits were hurrying along every day would have been exposed long ago. There were millions of people in a single team traversing the starry sky, and such teams were uninterrupted and uncountable. The following road was especially monotonous. The starry sky was deathly still and lifeless. Even the starlight seemed to be shrouded in a layer of gray fog, carrying with it a thick aura of death. The black stones formed a road that extended through the starry sky without end. Countless spirits transformed from spiritual seeds followed it tirelessly. Why were they so obedient? Chu Feng was puzzled. Just what kind of power was summoning them and making all the ghosts follow this path? There were many puzzles in his heart and he couldn't understand. During this process, Chu Feng tried to fly up and leave the road. However, he discovered that he was trapped on the black stone road and had no way of leaving. One time, he suddenly had a strange idea. His spirit left his body and walked on this path as a spirit, just like other ghosts. His body suddenly trembled and he discovered a secret. He heard a sound. To be exact, it was the sound of music. It was long and drawn out, like the cry of a ghost, like the whimpering of sorrow. It came from the end of the road, and it was precisely because of this that all the spiritual bodies were moving forward, approaching that place. After Chu Feng's psyche left his body, he had a special feeling. He instinctively wanted to get closer, as if there was a huge nest in front of him that he wanted to return to. Then, his spiritual body attached itself to his physical body while the other half floated outside, sensing in a different way. He experienced something different. He half closed his eyes and seemed to see a scene dyed in blood. The universe was broken, and all the habitable planets were dyed in blood. It was like the dusk of the gods. A mysterious soul song was played. In the sea of stars, countless spiritual bodies appeared and moved toward an incomprehensible place. They wanted to return to some strange origin. Strange. Chu Feng was deeply uneasy and also felt that this matter was too terrifying. Was this a true reincarnation or a man-made reincarnation instrument? Was everything under control? At first, he thought that after hearing the mysterious soul song, he wasn't far from his destination and was about to arrive. However, practice proved that he was thinking too much. He walked for several days in a row, and it was incomparably boring. He repeated the same action at every moment. He walked step by step, and other than that, nothing special happened. The other spiritual bodies were better because they had already been formatted and had no will. They couldn't experience this kind of boredom. However, Chu Feng was different. He was a person of flesh and blood. Mixing in with a group of ghosts was tantamount to smuggling. He felt that it was too boring and uninteresting. The most important thing was that he was worried about the matters on Earth. If he disappeared like this, others would think that he was dead. His death would have a great impact. He was worried that Yellow Cattle, Big Blackie, and the others would take revenge for him and thus trigger an ambush from those from the outer realms. He had already experienced how shameless those people were. A dignified saint had taken action against him in person. Moreover, there was more than one saint who had taken action to kill him in secret. They had reached a certain level of shamelessness. After 7 or 8 consecutive days, Chu Feng couldn't stand it anymore. When his spirit left his body, he heard the monotonous soul song ringing out with an unchanging rhythm. Then, he couldn't bear it any longer and began to hum various songs. I'll kiss you goodbye, the gardenia blossoms, whose tears are flying. If there really was a terrifying existence in the unseen world, they would surely be dumbfounded after hearing his soul song. Singing love songs on the road of reincarnation was something only a thick-skinned Chu Feng could do. It was extremely unreliable. Then, the group of ghosts either looked back or forward. The spiritual bodies in front and behind looked at him, as if they had seen a ghost. What are you looking at? Have you never seen such a romantic and elegant ghost before? Along the way, Chu Feng did all kinds of unreliable things, such as carving words on the 9-mouthed soul body. If you really want to reincarnate, you're born with words. Your heart has the universe and your constitution is extraordinary. Chu Feng patted his shoulder. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. They had finally left this boring starry sky and entered a strange land. Following the black stone road, they came to a desert floating in the starry sky. It was incomparably desolate and there was no sign of life. This was truly strange. There was a desert in the sea of stars with no end in sight. Moreover, there were celestial bodies no more than 10 meters above their head. Asteroids had been struck by meteorites one after another. There were many ring-shaped craters suspended in midair. They could be reached with a fierce leap. This completely violated the laws of physics. Of course, ever since Chu Feng had experienced all kinds of evolved civilizations, he had seen many things that violated the laws of nature. He was already somewhat immune. After walking for 2 days and entering the depths of the desert, Chu Feng found something strange. There were monsters on the road. They were soldiers. Soldiers. The life forms that guard the road of reincarnation have appeared. Chu Feng's pupils contracted. Was he finally going to see the final big secret? These creatures were all humanoid, but they had the characteristics of other races. For example, some had pitch-black ox horns on their heads, some had a long snake tail, some had a pair of claws, and some had 3 heads and 6 arms. They were all different, but there was one thing in common. They all carried the same ancient sword on their back. It was very old, as if they had experienced millions of years. Even the scabbard was rotting. In addition, these creatures were all skin and bones. At a glance, they looked like dead objects. Their flesh and blood were withered and without a trace of vitality. However, their dead bodies imprisoned their souls. Of course, their souls were slightly muddle-headed. It was as if their spiritual consciousness had been blinded. They were incomparably mechanical and rigid as they passively carried out orders from countless years ago. These withered creatures were responsible for guarding this road of reincarnation. Moreover, they were disciplining the spirits that occasionally left the group. They walked over stiffly and mechanically drove those spirits back into the group. Chu Feng stared and observed carefully. At first, he was worried that he was so special and had flesh and blood that he would be pulled out and lead to unpredictable results. He realized that he had worried too much. These creatures were extremely old-fashioned and completely muddle-headed. They were like clockwork machines that only cared about the spirits that had fallen behind. Some of the spirits were very weak. When they walked here, they were already on the verge of collapsing and even about to disperse. In the end, they were left behind. Even if they were driven back into the group, they would soon fall behind again. At this moment, Chu Feng saw a cruel scene. One of those withered creatures walked forward. With a clang, he mechanically pulled out the long sword in his hand and swung it violently. With a puff, he split the spirit that had fallen behind into 2. He could see that the spirit was directly annihilated. Not even dregs were left behind. A chill ran down Chu Feng's back. That sword was dark red in color and didn't have any gorgeous luster. However, it was too terrifying. It directly killed the spirit and made it vanish like smoke into thin air. The scabbard was half rotten and almost destroyed after the passage of time. However, the blade was simple and sharp, able to destroy the spirit with one strike. Chu Feng paid special attention and observed in secret. Not only were there weak spirits that fell behind, but there were also especially fierce spirits that weren't well behaved. For example, the spirit with 9 mouths behind Chu Feng could be considered one of the fiercer ones. It would occasionally bump into him. In reality, there were even fiercer ones. From time to time, there would be disturbances up ahead. There was a Taotai spirit gnawing on other spirit. This wasn't the first time. Not long after, there was another disturbance. In the desert, a withered humanoid creature walked forward. He pulled out a dark red long sword and directly hacked over. That powerful Taotai spirit was annihilated in an instant and disappeared completely. Chu Feng was envious. There were 2 people attacking in front and behind him. Although the people were different, the style of the sword was the same and its power was the same. It specialized in killing the spirits of creatures. Even the standard weapons on the path of reincarnation can be like this. The long swords produced are terrifying and abnormal. Truly extraordinary. Chu Feng had the idea to get his hands on one to test it out. He discovered that these creatures with long dead bodies weren't so difficult to deal with. Because their spiritual awareness was on the verge of extinction, all of their movements were instinctive. It was as if they were carrying out some kind of program. Their actual reactions were very lacking. Then he made his move. Seeing a lone creature, he used his spiritual energy to take it by surprise and snatch the simple long sword from its body. He threw it directly to the 9-mouthed monster behind him and had him hold it. He also ordered him not to make any unnecessary movements. After carving characters and beating it along the way, Chu Feng had long since made him obedient. On the path of reincarnation, after the creature lost the long sword, he only twisted his neck suspiciously. His bones emitted a mechanical sound as if he hadn't moved for many years. He was very stiff and finally stopped moving. It was as if he had lost consciousness and didn't know that the long sword had left his body. After walking a certain distance, Chu Feng snatched the long sword from the 9-mouthed monster and pulled it out of the rotten scabbard. In an instant, his hair stood on end. He felt that if this sword had struck his body, it would have been equally fatal. One sword can annihilate a person's spirit. This is a good item, a rare great killing weapon. Chu Feng immediately put it away. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw a large number of spirits disappearing and a large number of spirits vanishing in an instant. The destination was in front of him. No wonder there are creatures guarding the road with knives. We've already reached the final destination. Chapter 600. Chu Feng's expression was solemn. Unknowingly, he was nearing the end of the cycle of reincarnation. He felt the pressure and slowly pulled out the long sword he had taken from the path of reincarnation. He was solemnly on guard. Since ancient times, humans and other species had been discussing where humans and other creatures would go after death. Was there a cycle of reincarnation? Thus, there were all sorts of legends about the underworld and the netherworld. But who had seen it and who could verify it? Even evolved beings couldn't touch on these things. The more powerful a cultivator was, the more they believed that there was only evolution and no so-called reincarnation. Of course, evolved beings of different systems were an exception. It could be said that, whether it was an ordinary person or a powerhouse in an evolutionary civilization, all living beings had been thinking about whether there was still perception after death, whether there was a next life, what the next form of life would be, and where the next station would be. This was a topic that had never changed since ancient times. It was the ultimate mystery that all primates were exploring, but there had never been an answer. Now Chu Feng was here. He wanted to unravel this riddle and see clearly. Finally, it was their turn. They walked to the front of the desert, where the terrain suddenly dropped. Then, there was an ancient road outside the desert, leading to an unknown place. Outside the desert, there wasn't a starry sky, but only darkness. A small path was laid out in the void, winding in just like that. The soul song was clearly ringing up ahead, causing the void to tremble slightly. They had arrived, it was here. Chu Feng followed the large group and advanced. Then, he saw groups and groups of spiritual bodies directly fall in front of him and then disappear. The road ahead was cut off. What was going on? The end of the path of reincarnation was here? The darkness was boundless and vision was limited. It was the same even if he used his spiritual body to capture the road ahead. It was as if he had been swallowed by eternal darkness. Then, Chu Feng discovered that the so-called soul song was coming from the void here. It drew one's spirit and calmed all the spirits down. Then, they finally leapt up and jumped into the boundless darkness. Chu Feng was horrified and took a few steps back. He had already reached the end of the broken road and hid to one side, afraid of being accidentally knocked down by other spirits. He focused on defending against the nine-mouthed monster behind him. This guy wasn't honest and liked to knock people down for no reason. He charged forward with all his might. Whoosh! The monster with 9 mouths couldn't wait any longer. It knocked down a large number of spiritual bodies and directly pounced down. Chu Feng watched helplessly as it disappeared into thin air. Brother, goodbye. I wonder where you are going and whether we will meet again in the future. Chu Feng lowered his head and looked down. There were hundreds of thousands, millions of ghosts leaping down endlessly. This place was like a black abyss that swallowed all spiritual bodies. He could clearly see that the more powerful the spirit body, the longer the distance it flew, while the weaker spirit bodies disappeared the moment they stepped out of the broken path. Chu Feng sat on the side of the broken road and did not block the main force. Of course, he did not dare to go near the edge. He just stood there and watched carefully. This time, he didn't dare to follow recklessly. He was in his corporeal body state. If he really jumped down and reincarnated, he would be in big trouble. Moreover, even if he was only left with his spiritual body, he did not want to start all over again. He just wanted to be the person he was now. Chu Feng watched for a long time but really couldn't see anything. He didn't understand how these spirit bodies disappeared into thin air in the end. Could it be that they went to reincarnate just like that? Then, he tried to cut off a corner of his clothes and threw it into the dark land in front of the broken road. Then, he saw that the sleeve also suddenly disappeared. He was startled and muttered to himself, if there's really reincarnation, what if someone grows a piece of cloth? At this moment, Chu Feng's heart was filled with guilt. Then, with a bang, he was almost knocked into the dark abyss by a monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. He was instantly furious. He had already hidden far enough, but he was still attacked. He grabbed that guy with one hand. He looked like a real evil ghost and wanted to bite him. Chu Feng bared his teeth and said, "I'll leave a mark for you to learn a lesson." He decisively carved a few words on this monster's soul. "My uncle is Chu Feng." Then, he kicked this monster into the abyss. Chu Feng was idle and bored, so he guarded here. Every once in a while, he would be attacked by especially powerful and incomparably ferocious ghosts from time to time. He didn't stand on ceremony. As long as it was extremely vicious, he would carve. "My uncle is Chu Feng." As for the generally vicious and incomparably powerful ones, he would carve, "My elder brother is Chu Feng." Thinking of the heroic words of "My father is Li Gang" on Earth several hundred years ago, he felt that this kind of bad taste of his might have some kind of effect in the future when it was popularized on such a large scale. Then, in the following time, Chu Feng himself was a little numb. There were always creatures that were dissatisfied and had powerful instincts from when they were alive. They went on a rampage and were all cleaned up by him. He didn't realize that this would lead to an unforeseen event. It might not be a big deal in the short term, but it might be a huge storm in the future. Chu Feng didn't know how long he had stayed here. In the end, whenever he saw a powerful spirit, he would take the initiative to clean it up and carve a mark on it. Later, he figured out that if there really was reincarnation, a group of heaven-bestowed geniuses would gradually grow up and have this warning on their souls. That would be a big deal. I'm just trying to verify whether there is reincarnation or not. This is an experiment carried out in a scientific and responsible manner. Don't blame me. Maybe I'll discover a great law of physics. In fact, even Chu Feng himself felt guilty. If he talked about science and the law of physics like this, Newton's coffin would probably collapse. That person might climb up and fight him to the death. After he finished speaking with a slight guilty conscience, he looked left and right again, feeling as if something was staring at him. Huh! Suddenly, Chu Feng discovered a super soul. It was a vermilion bird. It spread its wings and soared into the sky. In an instant, it leaped very far and pounced into the end of the dark void. Chu Feng was surprised to find that stairs had appeared out of nowhere. The vermilion bird spread its wings and firmly grasped it. It wanted to climb up, but unfortunately, it fell down in the end. A muddle-headed big worm accidentally bumped into the vermilion bird and brought it over. At this time, when the vermilion bird was descending, the big worm borrowed a little force and slid to the other side like a swing. It curled up a corner of the railing and successfully crossed over. What's going on? Chu Feng was shocked. There was a world on the other side? The vermilion bird failed, but an ordinary big worm succeeded and crossed over. Then, he stopped moving and guarded here, observing carefully. After a long time, a proud and untamed golden-winged roc crossed over and pounced on the other side. In the end, the stairs and the stone railing appeared again. No living creature could fly here and could only rely on impact. With a bang, the roc crashed into the ice-cold precipice below the stone steps and fell into the abyss with a mournful cry. There really was another world on the other side. Chu Feng discovered that, in fact, every soul was pouncing forward. They wanted to pounce on the other side out of instinct, but they didn't leap as far as the vermilion bird and the golden-winged roc. Only ultra-soul bodies could do this, able to touch the other shore, make the terrain there appear. Chu Feng was shaken. There was another way out at the end of the reincarnation cycle? He had been waiting here for several days, and the number of spirits he saw every day was estimated to be in the hundreds of millions. One had to know that Chu Feng had previously seen from the millstone that 90% of these spirits were evolvers at the golden arhat level or above. But after they were crushed by the millstone, everything returned to their origins. All kinds of terrifying cultivation were severed, and only a few super soul bodies left behind a bit of power and some biological instincts. There might not even be a golden arhat level evolver on Earth. But there are so many here every day, there wouldn't be so many golden arhats even on other vital planets. Chu Feng was seriously doubtful. Were these still golden arhats born in his universe being formatted? He suspected that these were foreign evolvers being sent here to be reborn. In the following days, he saw two creatures that looked like true phoenixes also fail to pass the checkpoint. They crashed into the cliff on the other side and climbed up a few steps before finally falling into the abyss with a mournful cry. At the same time, he saw a creature he suspected to be a true dragon also fail. This place had the feeling that all life was equal. Even super life forms found it difficult to cross over to the other side. Several days later, Chu Feng was suddenly startled. He sensed something abnormal. A wave came from the army behind him, and he saw a beam of golden light rushing over at high speed. Chu Feng opened his fiery eyes and saw clearly that it was a humanoid entity with a resplendent golden talisman in his hand. He couldn't see anything special about himself, but the light emitted by the golden talisman enveloped him and protected him. He was actually flying through the air and approaching. He can fly. After arriving here, the humanoid creature was still flying through the air and was about to fly to the other side. Bang! Chu Feng grabbed one of his arms and wanted to stop him to take a look. That was because he didn't sense any dangerous aura and didn't feel that this person was too powerful. As expected, he stopped this person. How can a soul body stop me? This soul body was actually speaking. Even though he was muddle-headed, he still expressed his meaning. He held the golden talisman in his hand and a dazed expression appeared on his face. Who are you? Where did you come from? Chu Feng asked in surprise. I forgot. I haven't reached the destination yet, so I can't remember the past. This humanoid creature was almost sleep-talking. He was a soul body and emitted spiritual wave. That was why Chu Feng could understand him. Then, Chu Feng clenched his teeth and said, "Continue flying, I'll follow you." Chu Feng had a feeling that the golden talisman was extremely powerful. If it weren't for his corporeal body and the protection of the stone box, he probably wouldn't be able to touch this person. That was because he saw that there was only one symbol on the golden talisman. It was very similar to the dozens of golden symbols on the stone millstone. This was absolutely a heaven-defying item. However, he was fearless now. Dozens of golden symbols appeared on the stone box, making it even more comprehensive. Who wrote this golden talisman for this person to protect his reincarnation? After careful thought, it was incomparably terrifying. As far as he knew, the deity race, the Tao race, the quasi-immortal race, and the Buddhist race didn't have the path of reincarnation in the top 10 planet. They could already be considered the most powerful race in this cosmos. Chu Feng no longer used his energy to confine this person. As expected, this person flew high into the air once again under the guidance of the golden talisman and headed toward the opposite shore. Chu Feng clenched his teeth and gently pulled on one of his arms. He crossed over in his corporeal form. During this process, he felt a terrifying suction force in the darkness beneath his feet. It was as if there was a path of reincarnation there for people to reincarnate. This was an indescribable feeling. Chu Feng really began to suspect that beneath his feet was the final door to reincarnation. If he fell into the abyss, he would be directly reincarnated. Bang! In the end, it was more daunting than dangerous. He followed this person across the darkness and arrived at the opposite shore, landing on the step. Oh my God, ghosts can scare ghosts to death and can scare people to death at the same time. What are you doing sitting here? It was at this moment that Chu Feng almost fell down as he climbed up the enormous steps. That was because there was actually someone sitting cross-legged above, overlooking everything below. He had reached the end. After following the fellow with the golden talisman to this place, he had already reached the end. Chapter 601. It was pitch black here, and the railings were old and abnormally crude. It looked like something from ancient times or even longer. Additionally, there was blood on the stone steps that hadn't dried up yet. Moreover, each step was as tall as a person and didn't look like it was meant for ordinary people. Chu Feng felt like he had fallen into an icehouse. He was chilled from head to toe. He had been given a great fright just now and almost fell off the stone step. Who would have thought that in such a sinister and deathly silent place, he would suddenly see a black figure sitting cross-legged above and looking down at him? It was truly a bit frightening. One had to know that he was a stowaway and was already feeling guilty. He was afraid of giving himself away at the end of the reincarnation path, and now he had suddenly seen a living being. One had to know that behind him, hundreds of millions of spirits were falling into the black abyss like dumplings. Even the true dragon and phoenix were wailing as they slid down the stone walls. It could be said that even ordinary traversers had failed. This place was extremely dangerous. Chu Feng was a stowaway, and had followed the humanoid creature with the golden talisman. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to reach this place. He felt a headache coming on and felt that he shouldn't have shouted. It would have been better if he had pretended to be dead and muddle-headed like the humanoid creature with the golden talisman. However, he waited for a moment and found that there was no movement. At this juncture, he didn't dare use his fiery eyes. As a result, he couldn't see clearly in the absolute darkness. Now that it was so quiet, Chu Feng revealed a puzzled expression. He had always been bold, otherwise, he wouldn't have followed him here. At this moment, he was leaping up the stone steps. Behind him, the person with the golden talisman also moved. He seemed a bit confused and was passively following Chu Feng. Chu Feng ignored him. He had already crossed over to this shore and wanted to properly explore it. There was actually another world in the land of reincarnation. What kind of place was this so-called other shore? There was a shrine at the top of the 9 stone step. The black figure that Chu Feng had seen earlier was sitting there. A clay idol? Chu Feng was flabbergasted. This was completely different from what he had imagined. Earlier, he had even felt that someone was staring at him. In the end, when he got closer, it was just a clay doll? To be more precise, it was covered in dust and corroded by the passage of time. Now, it was impossible to tell whether it was male or female. It sat there without moving. It was humanoid and about the same height as a normal human. However, its attire was very simple and unadorned. It was a style that Luli had never seen before, and it even seemed a little barbaric. It was a simple Taoist robe sewn from animal skin. It looked a bit like a monk's robe. It was covered in dust and was almost unrecognizable. However, one could tell that it was made of leather. Chu Feng looked at it carefully for a long time, but he still couldn't figure it out. Finally, he looked left and right. Seeing nothing else, he suddenly opened his eyes of fire and gold and scanned the clay idol. However, in that instant, all he could see was radiance, making his eyes feel a piercing pain. The ancient clothing on the clay statue's body was too dazzling, simply more powerful than any supreme treasure, making him feel as if he was suffocating. Chu Feng's heart was pounding. What kind of statue was this? Could it be wearing the ultimate battle clothes from above the heavens? He hurriedly closed his eyes and stopped using the eyes of fire and gold. At this time, he discovered that the stone box was heating up. On the surface of the mountain and river diagram, there was a flash of golden light. His heart was beating violently. Just now, there was a reaction from the dozens of golden runes recorded on the stone millstone. Chu Feng's heart sank. He even guessed that if it wasn't for the stone box in his hand, he would already be dead. As expected, the moment he turned back, he discovered that the person following him was trembling and prostrating on the ground. It was as if he had seen something incomparably shocking and terrifying. Moreover, a corner of the golden talisman in his hand had been burnt and turned into ashes. There was a terrifying aura around him that was slowly dissipating. Evidently, it had threatened this person just now. At the same time, Chu Feng noticed that in the abyss, countless spiritual bodies that wanted to leap up and reach the other side had all collapsed in an instant. They turned into a rain of light and were completely annihilated. He drew in a breath of cold air. He didn't dare to imagine the origins of this clay idol's old robe. From Chu Feng's point of view, even ultimate weapons were nothing more than this. He had only taken a glance and his gaze had become a little more radiant, yet he had suffered an incomparably terrifying backlash. What the hell? He couldn't see through this clay idol. In fact, he was a little horrified. Was this really a clay idol under the dust? But if it was a physical body, how many years had it been since it had moved? Moreover, after sensing it carefully, there was indeed no vitality. This place was gloomy, and there was only a withered and deathly stillness. However, this clay idol's robe was too astonishing. Chu Feng couldn't help but size it up again. Of course, he didn't use the eyes of fire and gold, and only looked at it normally. An indescribable Tao rhythm came from under the thick dust. In that instant Chu Feng's mind was in a trance. He seemed to have seen the robe's original appearance. That was an incomparably terrifying beast. It appeared in the starry skies, opened its bloody mouth and roared to shatter the star seas. Countless evolvers died tragically, and the people were plunged into misery and suffering. As it moved, it turned around and went from the depths of the cosmos to the edge of the primal chaos. Chu Feng was gobsmacked. This was the will on the robe, or rather, the Tao rhythm left behind by the beast's original body. An old scene of the past had emerged. It's most likely a heaven illuminator, a taboo beast. Chu Feng was quite shocked because he had seen the might of a heaven illuminator before. Planets could explode with a flip of their hand, and a powerful race with a long history could be exterminated with a raise of their hand. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call such a character a taboo. They could tear apart the universe and destroy galaxies one after another. To them, killing a saint with a flick of their fingers was as easy as flipping their hands. A drop of their blood was enough to destroy a powerful orthodoxy, and a single strand of their hair could cut open the starry skies and slash apart top-notch evolvers. Chu Feng was scared. This robe had such a great origin? Then, when he saw the bracelet of bones on the clay idol's wrist, he began to doubt his life. Those were the horns, teeth, and Tao bones of different races. Each piece had a great origin and wasn't any weaker than the robe's original beast. Chu Feng stood there in a daze. He was truly in a state of disarray. While he was shocked, he really wanted to say that this was too wasteful. Wasn't it a waste to casually throw these treasures at the end of the reincarnation path and wear them on a clay idol? He really wanted to strip them off and wear them on his body. If he were to go out and casually shake them, he reckoned he could kill a large number of experts. However, he didn't dare to make a move. Just a glance with his fiery eyes almost caused a disaster. If it weren't for the stone box in his hand, his body and soul would have been annihilated. This is too shameful. What a waste. Aren't they afraid that they'll grow moldy with so many treasures displayed here? Chu Feng reckoned that those who dared to dress in such a high-profile manner in the outside world had to be outstanding heaven illuminators at the very least. Their strength would be at the forefront of the cosmos, maybe even among the top few. He searched this area for a long time but couldn't find anything else apart from this. Then, Chu Feng sat his butt down beside the shrine and cast a sidelong glance at the person not far away. You said you'll only remember everything when you reach the end of the reincarnation path. Why do you still look like you're in a daze? That person was indeed in a daze. He held the golden paper in his hand and sat there in a daze. He didn't move for a long time. When he heard Chu Feng's words, he was terrified. Then, he immediately knelt down with the golden paper in his hands and worshipped the shrine and Chu Feng. In a split second, a strange change occurred. The golden paper in his hand turned into a stick of incense. It was bright and dazzling with a rune carved on it. Then, it ignited by itself and emitted smoke that lingered near the shrine. Even me is being worshipped? Chu Feng revealed an odd expression. Then, he felt his wrist tighten as wisps of golden smoke filled the air. They turned into golden threads that curled around his wrist and became tangible. What was this? Was he enjoying the offerings like a god? Then, he discovered that most of the golden smoke was absorbed by the clay idol. The bone bracelet on its hand emitted wisps of golden light because of this, and much of the smoke entered it. I've obtained benefits? Chu Feng's expression was odd. He knew that the golden talisman was heaven-defying and might have been used by a supreme figure to protect his disciple. It was equivalent to paying for the passage here, and he had unintentionally obtained a portion of the offerings. This was too strange. Did the land of reincarnation also pay attention to human relations? With the talisman of a supreme figure in hand, one could cross over to the other side and obtain extraordinary fortunes? As expected, Chu Feng's guess was right. After enjoying the golden talisman offerings, the terrifying bone bracelet on the clay idol's wrist shone on the stone wall beside it. A hole actually appeared there, accompanied by auspicious clouds. The person kneeling on the ground immediately became excited. After kowtowing to the clay idol and Chu Feng, he stood up and rushed in. After arriving there, a wisp of purple chi flew out from the primal chaos and entered his body. In just a moment, he seemed to have woken up. I've received the great fortune of heaven and earth to be reborn like this. With the primal chaos purple chi on my body, I'm destined to become an ancestor. Who can oppose me? They want to break the ancient path from my universe to the outside world. I seem to have bowed to two divine statues just now. It's a bit strange. This was the person's voice. He wanted to turn back, but a wisp of purple chi wrapped around him. With a swoosh, it brought him into the depths of the resplendent ancient cave and completely disappeared. He seemed to have succeeded in his rebirth. Chu Feng looked as if he had seen a ghost. Even though he had followed millions of ghosts to this area and seen many ghosts, he was still incomparably shaken. That was because he had already vaguely heard some things. He didn't know whether the hundreds of millions of spirits in the dark abyss had reincarnated or not, but that person just now seemed to have succeeded. Moreover, that person had obtained great benefits and even had memories. What kind of person was this? Chu Feng was a bit suspicious. This kind of heaven-defying ability wasn't something the creatures of his universe could develop. The glowing ancient cave disappeared and the area returned to tranquility. Only the stone wall remained. That was a wisp of purple chi flying out from the primal chaos. Chu Feng's imagination ran wild. That was because that kind of thing was too similar to a certain creation recorded in the photon computer. In ancient times, there were babies born with a wisp of primal chaos purple chi on their bodies. They were called heavenly infants. That was because it was very easy for such people to become saints once they grew up. In the end, they were destined to become forbidden characters at the heaven illumination realm. I just let go of a great fortune. That brat reincarnated and directly became a heavenly infant. Chu Feng drew in a breath of cold air. Chapter 602. The sounds of conversation could be heard at the end of the silent reincarnation path. Even though there were hundreds of millions of ghosts, they were all silent as they leapt into the abyss. As for those withered creatures in the desert, they were also stiff and didn't know how to speak. Now, there were actually people conversing. This shocked Chu Feng quite a bit as he listened attentively. My memory is fuzzy, I still can't remember. There's no distinction between ants and heavenly dragons on this reincarnation path. Who are we and where are we going? We should be sisters going to reincarnate and obtain supreme fortune. But my head hurts, I can't remember anything else. After hearing this, Chu Feng immediately knew what kind of people had arrived. They weren't muddle-headed and had some memories. They were similar to the person with the golden talisman just now, but they were clear-headed and stronger. As expected, Chu Feng saw a silver light fly over and cross the pitch-black abyss. Someone had successfully arrived at this shore. This is the other shore. We've succeeded, but I have no memory of what to do next. Chu Feng could see clearly from above. These were a pair of twin sisters. Even though they were in spirit form, they looked exceptionally real and retained their appearances from this life. They both had long silver hair and were extremely beautiful, not inferior to Qin Luoyin. They had perfect faces and devilish figures. Apart from their human form, they also had a pair of silver wings that emitted auspicious light. They were several times more holy than the holy angels of the West. Apparently, they weren't creatures like angels, but rather a shockingly powerful race. Even after being formatted, they were still supreme souls comparable to true dragons and phoenixes. Chu Feng thought about it and tore off half his sleeve to cover his face. That was because the sisters were more clear-headed and he didn't want them to see anything amiss. These two people's appearances were impeccable. They were so beautiful that there were no flaws, especially since they looked exactly the same. This kind of unique style surpassed that of ordinary beauties. Chu Feng suspected that if these two were in the same universe as him, they should be quite famous and probably ranked among the top 10 beauties. I'll go investigate in the future. If there aren't two of them in my universe, then this will prove some things. Chu Feng pondered. There was a talisman paper in the two sisters' hands. It was silver in color and emitted light. They held it in their palms together. There was a character on the talisman paper in the form of tadpole characters. It was very similar to one of the dozens of golden characters on the stone millstone that were emitting a dazzling light. A heaven-defying talisman. Chu Feng sighed in his heart. Anything that involved these dozens of runes was absolutely extraordinary. Before, that person had obtained protection, and now these two sisters were also using this as an excuse to come here. This was a silver talisman paper refined by an unmatched existence for their sake, protecting them, as well as serving as an offering here, allowing them to be reborn, carrying their memories into reincarnation and reincarnation. This time, Chu Feng quietly took out an item from the spatial bottle and put it on his wrist. It was his snow-white, sparkling diamond chakram. He was imitating the clay idol beside him. That clay idol had a bone bracelet on its hand. He, on the other hand, put on the weapon that he valued a lot and wrapped it around his wrist. The two sisters leaned on the stone railing and arrived at the top of the stairs. They were somewhat dumbfounded when they saw the two figures sitting cross-legged there. They were even more shaken when they saw Chu Feng, who seemed to be made of flesh and blood. Even though they were quite perplexed and temporarily didn't have too many memories, they still instinctively felt that this was inconceivable. In the end, they still knelt down and kowtowed piously. At the same time, the silver talisman paper in their hands turned into a stick of incense and ignited on its own. It turned into wisps of silvery white mist that rose in spirals. A large portion of the silver mist entered the bone bracelet on the clay idol's wrist, but there were still strands that floated over and revolved around Chu Feng's wrist. But soon, these silver strands finally entered the diamond chakram. Chu Feng revealed a strange expression, but he didn't express anything. It wasn't good for him to make any movements with these two sisters here. After the silver incense had burned out, the bone bracelet on the clay idol's wrist lit up. As expected, the reincarnation cave opened once again. Auspicious light blossomed on the stone walls and divine mist surged. The two sisters cried out in surprise and quickly rushed in. In that instant, an astonishing light appeared. It was like the first wisp of light since the creation of the world. It carried with it the sound of the great Tao as it covered their bodies. This is the immortal light of the beginning. It actually has such a great fortune. Once we descend into the world, we will be called immortal infants. The two sisters recovered their memories and were no longer perplexed. Under such circumstances, even though they had long since prepared themselves mentally, they were still incomparably shaken. They couldn't help but cry out in alarm. It was clear that this great fortune exceeded their original expectations. "Hey, did you notice that there were two creatures sitting high up just now and not one? What's going on?" I didn't dare to look too much. I only noticed that the existence beside the divine shrine had a bracelet on his wrist. It was refined from a type of strange mother gold. At first, it looked like trash, but upon closer inspection, it seemed quite terrifying. It was different from other world-shocking mother gold. Cough! Chu Feng's cough shook this place. He was really afraid that the two sisters would turn around to investigate. In the end, when he spoke, the two sisters' beautiful faces immediately paled. They turned around and ran without looking back. Then, they were enveloped by the immortal light of the beginning and thus reincarnated. The reincarnation cave disappeared, returning to the stone wall. Then, Chu Feng felt a toothache. He had let go of another great fortune. Although he had never heard of the immortal light of the beginning before, it seemed to be even stronger than the chaotic violet qi. It was extremely heaven-defying. He was now somewhat moved. He really wanted to rob a creature holding a talisman and burn incense here. He wanted to replace it and reincarnate into the next life. However, there was a knot in his heart. Living in the present world, he wanted to be his original self even more. In this life, I'm not weaker than others. What need is there to be envious? Under normal circumstances, I will reach such heights sooner or later. Then, Chu Feng took off the diamond chakram and observed it himself. He found that it was somewhat different. This bracelet was even more translucent and sparkling. I wonder how powerful it is now. If I really attack, what effect will it have? Chu Feng muttered to himself. Soon after, he was bewildered because this diamond chakram was emitting a misty radiance. The inside of the ring seemed to be forming a space. There was an energy that made even him apprehensive pervading the air. This is said to be the ultimate trash. It can't evolve special divine might and can only be thrown out for impact. Now, it seems like it's going to transform. Chu Feng was delighted. This weapon was finally no longer silent. He didn't leave. Through the conversation between the sisters, he learned a few things. This might be an extraordinary period, and that was why they could come to offer incense and find a shortcut. They could obtain the supreme fortune and reincarnate with their memories. Chu Feng decided to stay behind and take a closer look. As expected, another person came a day later. This time, it was a man with a dragon tail and vermilion bird wings. He maintained his human form, and it was unknown what his true race was. He also held a talisman in his hand. It was purple in color and had a complex symbol engraved on it. He used it to cross the air and come over. The talisman ignited here and turned into a stick of incense. Chu Feng was delighted. Purple qi floated over and twined around his wrist, merging into the diamond chakram. It made it even more transparent and contained a Tao rhythm. This man was very ostentatious. After entering the reincarnation cave, he recovered his memories and immediately became incomparably conceited. Those who chant my true name will see eternal life in reincarnation. Chu Feng cast a sidelong glance at the tall figure in the cave. He thought to himself, "You're about to reincarnate yourself, yet you're still pretending?" Bah! He picked up a stone and directly smashed it at the back of the man's head. Ouch! In the end, the dragon-tailed, vermilion bird-winged, tall humanoid man didn't even turn his head. His heart was filled with fear as he madly ran away. He had also obtained an unimaginably great fortune here. Just like that, Chu Feng oversaw this place for half a month and welcomed the last person with the talisman. Before this, there were 8 batches of people and 9 creatures in total. Now, he welcomed the 9th batch and the 10th person. This was a Taoist priest, but he was sneaky and had a crafty look on his face. He hadn't even kowtowed, but he would glance at Chu Feng from time to time with an astonished look in his eyes. Strange, something's not right. Why is there another one? Where did he come from? Evidently, this young Taoist priest was quite extraordinary. He was clear-headed and hadn't lost his mind. He was secretly sizing up Chu Feng. At this time, Chu Feng decided to attack him and snatch his fortune. Otherwise, this Taoist priest would definitely discover his abnormality. Bang! At the crucial moment, just as the Taoist priest was feeling suspicious, Chu Feng smashed the diamond chakram down. Ever since it had enjoyed several incense offerings, the diamond chakram had become even more extraordinary. Now that it was flying down, the crafty Taoist priest cried out in pain and fell backward. At this time, the black talisman in his hand had already ignited, and the reincarnation cave on the stone wall had opened ahead of time. Chu Feng jumped down and used the stone box to forcibly extinguish the incense stick. He also made it reveal its original appearance as the black talisman. However, the black talisman was missing a corner. Evidently, it had been burnt away in that short period of time. Chu Feng left. He had stayed here for too long. However, he couldn't cross the abyss himself, so he had snatched this crafty Taoist priest's talisman. Who asked this Taoist priest to spy on him? Chu Feng had originally wanted to rob him, but this fellow had simply walked into the muzzle of his gun. He directly attacked. Ox knows I won't treat you unfairly. I'll send you to reincarnation. Chu Feng picked up the half-unconscious Taoist priest and threw him into the reincarnation cave. He just didn't know if he would obtain a supreme fortune like the other 9 people. Afterwards, Chu Feng decisively ran away. He didn't want to stay here any longer. That was because he always felt apprehensive when he was with that clay idol. He was worried that something big was about to happen. Oh damn, who ambushed me? Damn it, I haven't even lit the incense and the ceremony hasn't been completed. How did I get thrown into the cave? Chu Feng flew through the air with the black talisman in his hand. This was the last sound he heard in the sky above the abyss. Afterwards, he disappeared without a trace, decisively running away. Chapter 603. It could be said that the owner of this black talisman could be said to have obtained a rare fortune since ancient times. He could choose his own future path. Once reincarnated, he would have a terrifyingly high starting point, starting from the heavenly infant and immortal infant. Chu Feng was very satisfied. Even if he couldn't use it, the fact that he had this world-shaking talisman was a kind of confidence in itself. This was an unimaginable trump card. He was in a good mood as he crossed the Gobi Desert. He hummed a little tune and sang love songs on the reincarnation path. It was quite a flirtatious scene. However, behind him, in the reincarnation cave on the other side of the abyss, the young Taoist was crying and cursing loudly. Your grandfather's second uncle. Which son of a bitch stole this Taoist's opportunity? Boundless deity, I beat up your second grandpa and recited your name every day, but in the end, you don't protect me. I'll go back and become a demon. I'll rebel. Boundless deity, your second uncle, damn it! The Taoist cursed incessantly. Then, he cried again. Moreover, he was prepared to stay here and not leave. He was going to search for fortune in the reincarnation cave. Chu Feng flew along while humming a little tune. He crossed the void with the black talisman in his hand, and his speed was very fast. He discovered that the withered creatures in the desert with long blades on their backs were ignoring him and ignoring him. Nothing unexpected happened. He was originally prepared to turn around and run to the end of the reincarnation path if things didn't work out. Now, it seemed that he had worried too much. This is the pass to hell. The journey is smooth and unimpeded. It's much more reliable than the heaven-piercing express company. Chu Feng sighed. At the same time, he was wondering what kind of terrifying existence had produced different types of talisman that could actually protect people in the afterlife. It was too heaven-defying. Then, he slowed down and was in no hurry to hurry. At this time, he felt a bit regretful. He should have collected 2 more talisman papers. Each one was a priceless treasure that couldn't be traded for with one's life. In the end, I'm too soft-hearted and can't bear to play dirty tricks. He wasn't in a hurry. He carefully observed the mighty spiritual bodies along the way. They were all experts when they were alive, and ordinary creatures weren't qualified to set foot on this path. He could be considered to be going against the flow. Therefore, some of the creatures that were very strong and difficult to tame in life were now instinctively pouncing towards him. I should recognize more relatives. Maybe they will be of great use in the future. Chu Feng pondered. Then, when he saw creatures that were particularly ferocious, especially super soul bodies or creatures that were close to super soul bodies, he would rush up and carve words. He was quite bold and unrestrained. This kind of kinship relationship was not complicated at all, because they all called him uncle. He carved the same words on the bodies of those creatures. My uncle is Chu Feng. Unless it was a creature that was very pleasing to the eye and that made him feel like he was fated to look at it. For example, when he saw a female phoenix with bright and brilliant wings, he would only write, "My brother is Chu Feng." If other people knew that he dared to attack the creatures that he suspected to be the immortal bird, the true dragon, and the vermilion bird on this road, they would definitely be dumbfounded and curse him. What a bastard! Just like that, Chu Feng walked and stopped from time to time. He left the desert and entered the starry sky path. Then, he began to approach the ghost town where the stone millstone was located. He didn't stay idle along the way. His carving technique became more and more skillful, and he became a highly skilled craftsman. Even if he recognized relatives along the way, and there were groups of nephews, Chu Feng was still much faster than when he came. That was because he had the black talisman paper in his hand. He could travel in the void and save a lot of time compared to walking on the road. Soon after, he walked in the opposite direction and passed through the army of spirit bodies. He stepped through a door and returned along an ancient road. He saw the giant stone millstone again. At this time, he had returned to the radiant ghost town once again. If I really can't find the way back to the outside world, then I'll go to the afterlife. He wasn't willing to do that, but if there was no other way, it was also a choice. The stone millstone rotated slowly. Flesh and blood flowed out unceasingly and fell below. This was simply a huge pool of flesh and blood. Then, it broke down and turned into origin energy. A large number of spirit bodies emerged from there and walked over along the predetermined path. They listened to the soul song, accepted the summons, and stepped onto a path of reincarnation. Chu Feng felt a headache coming on. He discovered that he couldn't leave from other places because there was a light screen in the way. He could only follow the original path and return in the opposite direction. This meant that he had to bathe in blood and be crushed by the millstone again. This made him feel all sorts of discomfort. It was too heavy to soak in the flesh of the dead and the blood of all kinds of creatures. Ordinary people couldn't stand it. Fortunately, I have the black talisman paper. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to rush up the millstone since I can't fly here and my true body is also confined, Chu Feng said softly. He pinched his nose and flew up with the help of the black talisman paper. He entered the gap between the two large millstones and watched as the saints turned into mush. Their bones and dregs splattered in all directions. At the same time, he also saw a group of golden Arhat-level creatures spurting out flowers of blood. Then, it was as if they were squeezing soybean milk. The blood splashed and juices overflowed. Finally, Chu Feng rushed out from the hole of the millstone. His face was completely green. He turned his head around and directly vomited. Then, he ran without looking back. With the black talisman paper in hand, he smoothly left this area. Then, he climbed up the city wall and directly flipped over, escaping from the radiant city of death. This reincarnation pass is really not bad. Chu Feng's complexion was pale as he looked at the black talisman paper in his hand. He spat out another mouthful of gastric juice. He was far away from the city of death. He truly had enough. Moreover, he ran out of the battlefield area outside the city in one go. Now, he wanted to vomit whenever he saw the flesh of all kinds of rare birds and strange beasts. This was unimaginable in the past. In the past, those rare birds and spirit beasts were all delicacies to him, but now, he could always associate them with soybean milk. All kinds of creature juices splattered in all directions. Chu Feng was on the verge of tears. In the future, He reckoned he wouldn't be able to eat all kinds of delicacies because he would have too many associations after seeing them. To him, this was truly a great harm in his life. At this time, the young Taoist was also crying in the reincarnation cave and echoing him from afar. He had finally come out. Chu Feng put away the black talisman paper and put it into the spatial bottle. He stood several hundred kilometers away from the city of death with a pale face and let out a long sigh. The surroundings were still dark. Apart from the resplendent ghost town, the other areas were boundlessly desolate and pitch black. There wasn't the slightest sign of life to be seen. Chu Feng's pupils suddenly shone with a profound divine light and an odd expression appeared on his face. He had noticed the abnormality in this area. He had set it up before leaving, and he would be able to sense if any creatures were to land here. There was a small domain here that couldn't be considered profound but was fairly hidden. He saw the changes in this domain, indicating the appearance of creatures. Qin Luoyin. Chu Feng revealed a surprised expression. This woman didn't die. There was a deathly stillness in this space. He had almost confirmed that there were no other living creatures apart from him and Qin Luoyin. He stopped here and carefully calculated the time. He had walked the reincarnation path, and then sat cross-legged at the end for many days before setting out on his return journey. All in all, it had been over a month. Doubtlessly, Qin Luoyin would die without a doubt once she approached the ghost town. But presumably, she wouldn't do such a foolish thing. The aura of the ghost town could tear apart one's physical body even from a great distance. Powerful evolvers could warn them in advance. Chu Feng wasn't greatly affected because he had the stone box on him. Operation Hunt the Goddess has officially begun, he muttered to himself. The vast land was dark red in color and incomparably silent. It was as though no living creatures had prospered here since ancient times. Chu Feng walked alone on this spacious and cold land. An ordinary person would have been flustered long ago. Chu Feng, on the other hand, was quite calm. He had already walked the reincarnation path once, so he didn't care about this abnormal silence at all. He tried to find a path to the outside world while searching for traces of Qin Luoyin. He was prepared to hunt this incomparably popular woman who was regarded as a perfect goddess by all the young evolvers in the starry skies. This was a continuation of the battle at Kunlun. Chu Feng began to set up domains along the way in preparation to capture her alive. However, Qin Luoyin never appeared. She was nowhere to be found. During this process, Chu Feng resisted the urge to retch as he searched for a way out. He returned to the battlefield outside the radiant city of death many times to comprehend fist seals and cultivate various secret arts in front of the sea of corpses. There were peerless fist intents and peerless traces of the sword Tao here. It was extremely oppressive, but it could help him comprehend the Tao and effectively increase his strength. To outsiders, this was a battlefield of death, a graveyard of death. But to Chu Feng, this was a place where he would rise to power. In the outside world, the saints of the damning Pure Land were discussing in secret with a group of experts. They were all powerful saints who had taken action last time and were preparing to open the purgatory of Kunlun once again. But they had failed several times before this because the purgatory wasn't something they could open just because they wanted to. Previously, they had to offer sacrifices to the saint's essence blood to open a crack. Now it required even more sacrifices. There's not enough time. Even if Luoyin has the death substitution talisman and my spiritual seed, it's just 2 more lives. The saintess of the damning Pure Land was anxious and uneasy. She was preparing to go all out in the coming days to open the purgatory again, no matter what. In the purgatory, Chu Feng had walked out of the radiant city of death and was far away from this area. He was exerting his strength in order to get rid of Qin Luoyin as soon as possible. Chu Feng had a large number of engraved magnetic stones on him. Once they met, He could produce a sky full of them and set up a medium-sized domain in an instant. He believed he could trap the goddess of the damning Pure Land and capture her alive. Yes, there are traces. When Chu Feng cautiously approached the starting point of the purgatory, he found some traces. Qin Luoyin must have been active in this area for a long time, as there were traces left behind. This was just as he had guessed. The other party was pacing back and forth in the same place, most likely waiting for help. She believed the ancestor-level characters of the damning Pure Land would have a way to open this place and rescue her. This woman is also looking for me and wants to kill me. Chu Feng revealed a cold expression. He had discovered some arrangements like the heavenly thunder amethyst. If he were to accidentally step on it, he might be blasted to pieces after being triggered by the powerful energy. The heavenly thunder amethyst of the damning Pure Land was definitely not an ordinary item. It should be able to blast a top-notch genius to death. This descendant would definitely disdain carrying ordinary items on her. Let's see where you can run this time. Chu Feng held back a cold smile. He believed he would be the last one laughing. If they met, he would be able to successfully hunt the other party down. Before long, he found some words on the ground. They were all in the universal language. Chu Feng had already learned some of them from the photon computer back on Earth, and could roughly recognize them. Chu Feng, you have committed countless crimes and are notorious. You should be slaughtered and killed. Doubtlessly, this was Qin Luoyin expressing her hatred and killing intent. Chapter 604. Darkness enveloped this area. Apart from the radiance of the ghost town thousands of kilometers away, the other areas were always pitch black and incomparably desolate. Chu Feng searched carefully in hopes of finding Qin Luoyin. He knew that the other party had the same idea as him and was also thinking of ways to kill him. Rather than being ambushed, it was better for him to take the initiative and deal with this damning Pure Land disciple first. Chu Feng didn't dare be careless. Even though he had made ample preparations and believed he could restrain the other party, he was still incomparably cautious. After all, the other party was one realm higher than him. Although his domain methods were powerful, it would be difficult to hunt him again if he were to make a mistake and allow the other party to escape. In the dark night, Chu Feng was like a specter traversing this desolate land. He raised his head inadvertently and saw all kinds of meteorites suspended in the air. He frowned. Could it be that Qin Luoyin was in the air? At the same time, he was thinking about how this space suppressed evolvers and prevented them from flying under normal circumstances. Yet, these small planets and meteorites could be strewn about. It was truly odd. Chu Feng became increasingly serious as he walked quietly. In the end, he found some clues not only on the ground but also on the meteorites in the air. There were violet heavenly thunder crystals. This daydreaming girl is truly ruthless. Chu Feng's cold intent grew even more intense. He felt that he would have to deal a fatal blow once they met. He couldn't be too optimistic and feel that he could capture her alive. This was a formidable opponent. After all, he was one of the top geniuses of the younger generation in the universe. I robbed her during the battle outside of Mount Kunlun. How come she has such a powerful weapon on her? Where did she hide it? Chu Feng revealed an odd expression. He felt that he had miscalculated. He should have used the fiery eyes to see through her from inside out. This woman still had other spatial treasures that he hadn't discovered. Chu Feng was like a specter. His feet didn't touch the ground as he flew through the area. However, he still couldn't find any traces of Qin Luoyin. This caused his expression to become increasingly serious. The other party was definitely not dead. She had hidden herself so well that he actually couldn't find her. He leapt up, using his powerful jumping force, easily rushing several hundred meters into the air, landing on a floating boulder. Then, he leapt up again, continuously advancing towards the heavens. He felt that Qin Luoyin might be up there. If she was waiting for help, she might very well be at the sky where the void had split open earlier. He had the black talisman and could use it to fly through this space. However, it was too glowing and too eye-catching at night. He would easily become a target for Qin Luoyin's attacks. Finally, after climbing for a while, he made another discovery. There were traces left behind by her, but they were very faint. "Let's see where you're going." Chu Feng felt that he had grasped the other party's thoughts. The two of them might encounter each other, and she might really be hiding among the meteorites in the sky. He felt that since he had not shown his face for more than a month, the other party should have become more careless, perhaps thinking that he was dead. "If I can't find you this time, I'll expose myself and lure you out." He didn't want to make a ruckus and attract the enemy, because being in the dark was an advantage in itself. Of course, if he were to expose himself, he would definitely set up a trap for the other party. However, there was only one chance. Once he failed and couldn't catch the other party, he wouldn't be able to do it a second time. Hence, he didn't want to use himself as bait to lure the other party out. Suddenly, Chu Feng was shocked and his hair stood on end. Just as he was jumping up, he sensed something amiss on a floating meteorite. Others would have overlooked it, but Chu Feng was a domain researcher and was extremely sensitive to earth and qi. His hair stood on end on the spot. Finally, he discovered that there was something in the crevice of the meteorite. He opened his fiery eyes and saw through the falsehood. There, he saw a small bow. It was buried and couldn't be seen by ordinary people. Chu Feng's fiery eyes lit up and saw through its essence. This caused his heart to tremble. The small bow was only the size of a palm and was jet black, made of wood. There was a small scarlet arrow on the bowstring as though it had been drenched in blood. Chu Feng had already landed on the meteorite. After discovering something was wrong, he jumped down and turned to run. Buzz! The void trembled slightly. That was the sound of energy tearing through the air. Chu Feng was especially sensitive to such fluctuations. He knew it was a complete waste and shot out the small arrow. At this moment, he was like a primordial divine ape leaping from one meteorite to the next and rapidly approaching the ground. A dim bloody light chased after Chu Feng at an extreme speed. It was actually changing directions. Wherever Chu Feng went, it would chase after him in the same direction. "What is this thing?" Chu Feng was astonished. The damning Pure Land had too many treasures. He hadn't even seen Qin Luoyin herself, yet she had placed a terrifying secret weapon that could actually chase after an enemy. It was somewhat evil. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Chu Feng was like a beam of flowing light as he moved between the meteorites in the air. He changed his direction continuously and finally landed on the desolate land. But the scarlet arrow behind him didn't let go. It had already arrived in front of him and was about to strike him. Chu Feng was astonished. He fished out the diamond chakram and threw it backward. He also held the stone box in his other hand, ready to smash it at any time. Bang! Unexpectedly, the diamond chakram emitted a snow-white radiance. It was extremely powerful and smashed the scarlet arrow on the spot. The scarlet arrow transformed into a rain of scarlet light and dissipated there. "It's not that powerful, is it?" Chu Feng was suspicious. He felt that this small arrow was all bark and no bite. But then, he staggered and almost fell to the ground. He felt dizzy and the situation was far from reassuring. Afterward, he saw the scarlet specks of light scatter like a rain of blood at the place where the small arrow exploded. A blurry scene of ancient ancestors offering sacrifices appeared. Motherf ****. Chu Feng let out an odd cry. He had a bad premonition and ran madly toward the ghost town. He knew what was going on. He wanted to leave this place immediately and find a place where Qin Luoyin couldn't reach. This was an ancient curse technique. The red arrow shot out by the palm-sized bow was an ancient curse weapon. Ever since he had the photon computer and could connect to the interstellar network, he had looked up a lot of information. Additionally, he had heard yellow cattle talk about some indefensible outer realm method. He was afraid that he would unknowingly fall into their trap if he encountered a ruthless character. Among them, the most terrifying were the cold and sinister curses that people couldn't let go. This kind of small bow and arrow was a weapon refined by the ancient ancestors using witchcraft. Once fired, it was almost like a curse that could kill the enemy. Presently, Chu Feng's spirit was unstable. Although the small arrow didn't hit him, the curse had already taken effect and entered his body. According to legend, if this kind of thing was used by an expert, even a saint would be cursed to death. In truth, its physical attack was also quite terrifying. It was enough to pierce through metal and rocks, including the body of an evolver. But the diamond chakram had transformed and was extremely powerful. It shattered the arrow and unleashed part of the curse's power. Qin Luoyin actually has such a thing. Chu Feng clenched his teeth. It was truly extravagant to use it on him. That was because this kind of ancient cursed weapon could even nail a golden arhat to death under well-prepared circumstances. It was actually used to ambush him. After running for a long time, he felt dizzy. The ancient curse was impossible to guard against. It was too different from the current cultivation system and almost made him faint. He knew that this was injuring his spirit. At the same time, Chu Feng opened his fiery eyes and vaguely saw a graceful figure chasing after him from 50 kilometers away. The other party might not have been able to see him, but she sensed something after the arrow was fired. That was why she was chasing after him. Chu Feng took out the black talisman and no longer looked back. He transformed into a beam of light and rushed toward the ghost town. Doubtlessly, his current speed was very fast and he had shaken off the other party in the blink of an eye. Before long, he charged into a range of several hundred kilometers from the ghost town. He could be considered safe because Qin Luoyin couldn't approach this place. Chu Feng collapsed on the ground outside of the ghost town, gasping for breath. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat and he had a splitting headache. He knew he had to persevere or else he would die here. He carefully recalled that it wasn't easy to use this kind of ancient cursed weapon. First, the other party had to grasp his new blood essence and then refine it for many days. Only then would he be able to trigger the killing intent when he got close. It was obvious that the other party had kept his fresh blood and smeared it on the arrow when they bit each other's lips last time. Then, she would be able to target him. There was no good way to dispel this kind of ancient curse. He could only endure it and be immune next time. But it was easier said than done to endure it. One had to know that these weapons could kill golden arhat. If they were used by saints, they might even curse other saints to death. This weapon was definitely the most precious secret weapon on Qin Luoyin. In order to kill him, she had actually used it on a little visualization-level cultivator. The only fortunate thing was that the diamond chakram was extraordinary and was able to shatter the arrow. Otherwise, he would have died without a doubt if it had pierced through his body and triggered the curse in his flesh. Logically speaking, I've only been infected by a little bit. Moreover, it was Qin Luoyin who used it. It wasn't an old monster's method, so I should be able to endure it. Several hundred kilometers away from the ghost town, a beautiful silhouette was emitting a faint light. Her flawless body was like a perfect masterpiece of the heavens. She was so beautiful that it was almost illusory. Her beautiful purple hair danced in the wind as she took off her multicolored mask and gazed in the direction of the ghost town. Her face was snow-white, sparkling, and absolutely beautiful. I feel that he escaped in this direction. Can he escape into the ghost town? Qin Luoyin didn't believe it. She then circled around the bright area and searched along the way. Chu Feng lay on the ice-cold ground, alternating between hot and cold. In the end, he was almost muddle-headed and almost died. He couldn't move for a full 3 days and 3 nights, and his divine soul was almost disintegrated. This was the result of his great improvement in strength after practicing fist techniques, comprehending breathing techniques, and comprehending secret arts outside the ghost town. If he hadn't cultivated and walked on the reincarnation path when he fell into this space, he might have died on the spot. On the 4th day, Chu Feng sat up from the ground like a corpse coming back to life. His expression was unsightly because he had actually almost died. Originally, he was going to hunt Qin Luoyin and capture her. But in the end, this was the result. He looked down at the golden thread on his wrist, and then glanced at the diamond chakram and stone box. These things didn't take the initiative to defend against the curse. It seemed he knew too little about this field, and needed to study it in detail in the future. Qin Luoyin. Chu Feng revealed a cold expression. He circulated his breathing technique and sat cross-legged for half a day. Only then did he stand up and walk away in large strides. He took a deep breath and made up his mind. It would be too embarrassing if he didn't kill or capture this woman alive. He had actually been hunted by the other party and almost died. Chapter 605. Chu Feng walked slowly because he was pondering. He originally had several plans to kill the other party, but he had almost been shot to death by an ancient incantation weapon. He had completely exposed himself and told Qin Luoyin that he was still alive, so his plans would be greatly reduced. He hadn't appeared for a month, so naturally, the other party would become careless and even think that he was dead. But now that he had appeared so suddenly, it was absolutely terrible and alerted the other party. He suddenly stopped and turned back toward the ghost city. He hadn't gone far when he returned after a short while. "I'm sorry, everyone. Please let me choose 2 corpses. Your souls are no longer here anyway, so leaving behind these corpses is useless." Chu Feng apologized and then searched carefully in the battlefield outside the city. He was choosing the weakest humanoid creature, but there were no weaklings in this battlefield. The creatures here were all ridiculously powerful when they were alive and were all great experts in the past. Chu Feng pondered that even the weakest person here was a golden arhat. Otherwise, their corpses would have long since decayed and wouldn't be preserved. Fortunately, these were corpses from countless years ago. The energy within their bodies had been gradually exhausted by the corrosion of time, and their physiques had long since weakened to the lowest level. There was no true immortal in this world. Even the mightiest existence or item would be cut down by time and drowned in the dust of history if they were the slightest bit careless. Chu Feng chose 2 satisfactory corpses and decorated them before putting them into a spatial bracelet. He had suppressed so many divine sons and saintesses in the past, so he had too many spoils of war on him. He had once left behind a batch of premium items and didn't lack spatial magic weapons. Chu Feng walked hundreds of kilometers and then stealthily searched for Qin Luoyin along the way. He couldn't afford to make a mistake this time, otherwise, it would be increasingly difficult to kill the other party. He had suffered the torture of the ancient incantation during these few days and almost died. It was truly a close call. Chu Feng's expression was unsightly as killing intent soared in his heart. He wanted nothing more than to capture the damning Pure Land's descendant immediately. But from another perspective, he also admired the other party's methods. They were ruthless enough to even make him fall into their trap. Chu Feng crouched down and examined carefully. Qin Luoyin had appeared in this area before. As expected, she had chased after him here. However, it was obvious that she didn't dare to step close enough to the ghost town. Chu Feng observed the terrain along the way. Unfortunately, none of the domains he had set up earlier were activated. The other party's path of advance was quite cautious and somewhat erratic. This woman was extremely meticulous, and her intuition was too sharp. She had avoided many domains. Chu Feng put himself in Qin Luoyin's shoes and followed her train of thought. He felt that the other party might be circling the ghost town in search of his track. Perhaps the other party was prepared to collect his corpse from the very beginning. After all, once hit by the ancient curse weapon, the body of the golden Arhat would disintegrate, and even his soul would collapse. Fortunately, the small arrow did not pierce his body. Along the way, he sensed some murderous intent. Opening his eyes of fire and gold, he saw some traps. There was a terrifying black bell and a powder that was similar to soil. It was almost invisible as it was mixed in the soil. Chu Feng's eyes were cold. If he was careless, he might fall into a trap again. Even the most unremarkable powder was terrifying. That was the soul disintegration powder. Once stained with it and entered the body, it would be difficult to get rid of. It could even slaughter one's soul. In the eyes of the young evolvers of the universe, Qin Luoyin was a perfect goddess-level character. She was flawless and could be considered peerless in beauty. But if one were to truly exchange blows with her and understand her, they would find that she was an incomparably dangerous character. Her killing methods were swift and ruthless. It would be easy to suffer a great loss if one were to only focus on her beauty. If she wasn't powerful enough, how could she be ranked among the top few of the universe's younger generation? Chu Feng walked in a circle and made some deductions. Next, he followed the clues and returned to the original path. He was ready to begin his arrangement. In the end, he confirmed a certain area where Qin Luoyin had appeared not too long ago. The time difference couldn't be more than 2 hours. This was the result of his observation with his Genesis art. After careful observation, he found an amethyst heavenly thunder crystal under a rock and a black wooden box in a crevice. Naturally, they were all incomparably dangerous. Then, Chu Feng began to set up domains around the area. They were all killing fields, layer after layer, and all of them were lethal. This won't do. I need to change it and make the domains more controllable. Chu Feng pondered for a while. He found that Qin Luoyin was extremely vigilant and sharp. She was probing even as she walked. If she were to come into contact with a domain, she would retreat immediately and most likely not be able to trap her. Next, Chu Feng began to correct and rearrange the domain around the area. There were large amounts of magnetic materials in his spatial bracelet. Finally, he finished his arrangement. After confirming that there were no problems, he fished out a corpse from his spatial bracelet and helped it put on his clothes. At the same time, Chu Feng cut his wrist and dripped some blood onto the corpse. After some thought, he also arranged the other corpse in the same way. Finally, Chu Feng constructed another concealment domain and hid within it. All right, the hunting operation begins. With a bang, he tossed one of the corpses into the target area in the distance. In the end, the amethyst heavenly thunder crystal there exploded on the spot. That scene was somewhat terrifying. It was as though the sky was falling and the earth was splitting apart. Everything within a radius of 1/2 kilometer had turned into magma and surged into the sky. At the same time, lightning interweaved and illuminated the pitch-black night sky. Chu Feng was terrified. He would surely die if he were to step in carelessly. The might of this amethyst heavenly thunder crystal was too terrifying. He reckoned that even those at the visualization realm or above would be blasted into dregs. After careful thought, Qin Luoyin was an evolver at a higher realm than the visualization realm. The amethyst heavenly thunder crystal she had grasped was naturally used to deal with those who had surpassed the visualization realm. Chu Feng sighed. Fortunately, he had set up the domains outside. Otherwise, some of them would have been destroyed. Afterward, he revealed a smile. That corpse was quite sturdy. After being blasted into pieces, some large pieces flew up and weren't devoured by the lightning and magma. At the same time, he gained a new understanding of the creatures outside the city of death. This was the most unbearable corpse he had found among them. following which, Chu Feng trembled as a black wooden box rushed out from the magma. It wasn't burned to ashes and instead opened. From within flew out a blood-red broken blade. After rushing up with a swoosh, it cut the pieces of corpse in the air into even smaller pieces. "Goddamn it, Qin Luoyin, you're really ruthless." If it wasn't for Chu Feng grasping domains, being sensitive to the movement of the earth energy, and his fiery eyes, he would have long since discovered that this was a dangerous place. Anyone else would have died without a doubt. Afterward, Chu Feng stopped moving. He lay dormant here and waited for Qin Luoyin to appear. He had chosen this place and purposely activated the other party's trump card. He wanted to lure her over and then ambush her. The commotion here was too great. It illuminated the pitch-black night sky and was incomparably eye-catching. It could probably be seen from hundreds of kilometers away. That was because the lightning and magma had rushed dozens of kilometers into the pitch-black sky. It was too intense and glaring. As expected, not too much time had passed. There was movement in the distance as someone tore through the sky and arrived nearby. Then, there was no more movement. It seemed he had successfully lured the snake out of its hole. Even though Chu Feng was hiding in an invisible domain, he was holding his breath for fear of being exposed. He was like a fossil that had merged with heaven and earth. All of his vital signs had disappeared. Afterward, he saw a ghostly figure with disheveled hair enter the domain. At this time, the magma was no longer boiling and had almost solidified. She stepped on the scorching rocks and the occasional semi-liquid red rocks and liquid. Just like that, she charged in and observed the remains of the severed hands on the ground. Chu Feng was just about to activate the domain. But he was moved, but he endured it in the end. That was because he felt that Qin Luoyin wasn't ordinary. She was very cautious and powerful, not someone easy to deal with. Most importantly, why was this woman's hair disheveled? At the thought of this, a thought flashed through his mind. Then, he took out the other corpse and quietly approached the domain in front of him. This corpse had long since been draped in Chu Feng's clothes and smeared with his blood essence. It possessed his intense aura. Chu Feng split off a strand of his spiritual power to control it. With a boom, he smashed toward the back of Qin Luoyin's head to kill her. That purple-gold sword breaker erupted with resplendent violet flames. At the same time, it was also bursting with electricity. This was a great killing weapon Chu Feng had seized from a divine son. Qin Luoyin, die. The wisp of Chu Feng's spiritual power in the corpse transmitted this message. Bang! That woman suddenly turned back and didn't evade. Instead, she raised her hand to grab the corpse. Her hair was disheveled, but the airflow lifted it up and revealed her true appearance. It's fake. This woman's face was stiff like a wooden puppet. This wasn't Qin Luoyin herself, but a puppet being controlled by her. Chu Feng's heart went cold. Fortunately, he hadn't activated the domain in a hurry. Otherwise, he would have been tricked. That wouldn't be luring the snake out of its hole, but rather alerting the snake and inviting trouble. Bang! The puppet was damaged after being struck by lightning and burned to a crisp. However, one of her hands still managed to pierce into the corpse's body. You, Qin Luoyin, you're truly sinister. Chu Feng's spiritual power fluctuated within the corpse as he shouted. Then, he felt something was wrong. That claw was covered in soul disintegration powder and was about to destroy his soul. That wisp of spiritual power withdrew decisively and left the area. The next moment, the corpse fell to the ground and rolled about before disappearing. In the dark, Chu Feng wiped off his cold sweat. This Qin Luoyin was truly difficult to deal with. She was exceptionally cautious and her methods were ruthless. A moment of carelessness would land him in. Then, he discovered that the corpse had begun to rot. It was suffering from all kinds of corrosion. That puppet woman was somewhat terrifying, but at this time, the puppet had also broken into pieces and various metal components fell to the ground. Chu Feng lay in seclusion without the slightest movement. Only after a long while did Qin Luoyin's figure appear. She looked on silently from afar and then raised her snow-white palm. Lightning flew out and struck the nearby ground. In the blink of an eye, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Sand and stones flew everywhere as the earth split open. Chu Feng frowned. This flawless goddess in the eyes of the youths of all races wasn't simple. She was still not at ease, even at such a juncture, and was still probing. Qin Luoyin knew that he understood domains. Even though she had seen him die, she was still on guard and was exceptionally cautious. Chu Feng felt that he had made the right move in making his domains controllable. The domains wouldn't reveal themselves if he didn't activate them. Even if they were damaged, they wouldn't reveal their power. Finally, Qin Luoyin walked in with light step. She had somewhat let down her guard. Chu Feng laughed. This girl had finally fallen into his trap. The hunt for the goddess had begun. Then, he decisively activated the domains. Chapter 606. Suddenly, one line after another lit up on the ground. It was as though red-hot molten iron was flowing along the grinding tools and was exceptionally dazzling in the dark night. Then, with a boom, numerous orderly and irregular patterns appeared in all directions. They were incomparably complex, and all of the lines were exceptionally dazzling. The domains had been activated. Multicolored light appeared on the ground. At first, it was only blazing and emitting bright light. Then, it became incomparably bewitching as various colors appeared at the same time. Qin Luoyin immediately felt that something was wrong. She soared into the air and was about to charge out. Unfortunately, she had no time to react once the domains were activated. They completely recovered in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint and formed an effective killing zone. Boom! A large golden pestle appeared in the air and smashed toward Qin Luoyin. This was one of the domains called Demon Subduing. This was a Buddhist race domain recorded in the ancient records on the moon. Chu Feng had comprehended it thoroughly and could now set it up to deal with experts beyond the visualization realm. Light surged from the ground as the brilliant lines interweaved in the air to form a treasured pestle. With a boom, Qin Luoyin's body trembled violently. She staggered and almost coughed up large mouthfuls of blood. At the same time, the treasured pestle exploded and transformed into a golden mushroom cloud. The surging energy made this place seem even more terrifying. Chu Feng. Qin Luoyin stood on the desolate land within the domains. Her figure was extremely tall, even taller than the average man. She was clad in a brand new multicolored dress that wrapped around her slender and alluring body. Her curves were undulating and extremely perfect. Her multicolored mask had long since been removed. Her lustrous white face was filled with coldness and killing intent. Her large purple eyes were like glistening jewels, but they were very cold as she stared at Chu Feng. Her hair was light purple in color, smooth and supple. It hung down like satin with a sparkling luster. Her face was flawless, and her red lips were bright and sexy. However, her temperament was currently very cold, and her entire person was extremely elegant. Qin Luoyin, are you going to surrender or are you going to wait for me to take action? Chu Feng walked out from the concealment domain. You managed to survive after being injured by an ancient curse weapon. You really do have a long life. Qin Luoyin was fairly calm and stood there without making any rash movement. Her swan-like snow-white neck and chin were slightly raised with a hint of arrogance. It was unknown whether she was trying to provoke her opponent or whether she was looking down on Chu Feng. Chu Feng, don't let me capture you. Otherwise, it'll be hard for you to die even if you want to. The corners of her mouth curled into a cold smile. She was still so calm despite being trapped in the domain. In other words, she wanted Chu Feng to live in pain that was worse than death. However, although her words were sharp, her charm was unparalleled. Are you reminding me that once I capture you, I'll teach you a lesson 100 times? A faint smile appeared on Chu Feng's face. Qin Luoyin flung her long hair and began to dance. Her sleeves fluttered and her long skirt fluttered. Her graceful body swayed like an exiled fairy about to rise with the wind. A fine strand of hair flew out from the darkness. It was almost invisible as it traversed the void and flew toward Chu Feng. This was the golden thread needle. She wanted to kill the enemy abruptly. However, she had underestimated Chu Feng's domain. Even the golden thread needle couldn't stop it. Dazzling sparks erupted in the air as the hair-like weapon broke apart and transformed into dense energy. Qin Luoyin, enjoy it slowly. Chu Feng ridiculed with an icy gaze. Boom! He stomped forcefully on the ground, and the activated domain began to erupt. A glaring rain of light soared up from the ground and covered Qin Luoyin like a firework explosion. Then, it enveloped her completely. That area was extremely beautiful, but it was also terrifying because it was surging with energy. One could see that the surrounding void was warping as though it was suffering from the most terrifying domain power. It was about to destroy this space. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Numerous secret treasures appeared around Qin Luoyin. There was a jade necklace, a magical conch, and an exorcism pestle. This astonished Chu Feng. Weren't these items from the Buddhist race? It seemed Qin Luoyin's secret treasures were quite abundant. These secret treasures lit up and bombarded outwards to resist the domain runes. This was a battle of life and death. She didn't dare be careless and did her best to activate these weapons. Qin Luoyin, I've searched your body from head to toe. How come I didn't find these weapons? Where did you hide them? Chu Feng asked with malicious intentions. His tone was frivolous as he provoked the other party. Idiot! Qin Luoyin cursed directly. This had never happened before. She was gentle and devastatingly beautiful when she was walking under the starry skies. Now, her current attitude was naturally one of anger and anger from embarrassment. Her killing intent was boiling. Boom! In her surroundings, there were secret treasures that exploded, crushed to pieces. For example, that magical conch was still releasing woo-woo sounds just now. All types of golden symbols appeared, surrounding her, but now it was broken into pieces, then turned into fine powder. Chu Feng's expression was cold. Although he was being cursed, he wasn't affected in the slightest. He stood outside and observed the most powerful descendant of the damning Pure Land. Qin Luoyin was slender and elegant. Her legs were long and supple, her waist was round and slender, and her chest was towering. She was full of arrogance and her beautiful face made her appear even colder and more elegant. She was moving her arms as though she were performing a gentle and breathtaking dance. It was pleasing to the eyes and the mind. Something terrifying happened when her lustrous arms streaked across the void. She was actually able to destroy domain runes. Her long legs were able to scatter the domain light rain that was enveloping her. She was full of might. This was the damning Pure Land's dream dance. She could stretch her body and hypnotize her cells, releasing the potential within every inch of her body. It could be said to be exceptionally terrifying. However, she had to pay a great price to use the dream dance. Afterward, her body might overload and become unbearably exhausted. She might even collapse. Chu Feng drew in a breath of cold air. He was truly astonished to see her disintegrating domains with her physical body. This woman was too powerful. If she had used this move against him back at Kunlun, it would be difficult to say who would emerge victorious. But he guessed that this stunning dance would have repercussions and might affect her body greatly. That was why Qin Luoyin didn't dare use it rashly. Today, she had been forced into a corner and had no other choice. Bang! Many domain runes exploded around Qin Luoyin within the domain. In truth, she was also dodging. She didn't want to take it head-on, but she had been locked down by the domain. She moved her beautiful body continuously and twisted her waist like a beautiful snake. She was agile and swift as she streaked across the sky from time to time. Unfortunately, there were too many domains here. Chu Feng had laid down 12 layers in one go just to kill her. Boom! Another treasured pestle took shape in the void. The Buddhist race's domain was astonishing as it blasted Qin Luoyin's back. She staggered and blood seeped out from the corner of her mouth. Buzz! Following which, the Tao race's domain appeared. 9 illusory figures sat cross-legged in the void like the Dharma bodies of heavenly venerables. They appeared in different forms and suppressed downward. Clang! This time, Qin Luoyin didn't dare use the dream dance to resist. She had no choice but to bring out another secret treasure. This time, it was a small lush green umbrella that seemed to be forged from green gold. It opened up abruptly and began to spin to resist the illusory figures. The heaven and earth rumbled and the void seemed to be collapsing. Energy surged like boiling lava and wreaked havoc in all directions. You have so many secret treasures. Where did you stuff them? In your ears? Or other parts of your body? Do you really toss the golden cudgel into your ears like Monkey-san? Chu Feng mocked and ridiculed. He was fairly relaxed at the moment as he stood outside the domain and watched Qin Luoyin fight back. From time to time, he would toss a few magnetic stones inside to repair the domain and maintain its integrity. He operated it at its most powerful state and firmly suppressed Qin Luoyin. The demonic umbrella exploded with a boom, sending hundreds of metal fragments flying in every direction. They were ground to pieces by the domain. One could imagine how terrifying this area was. That was a secret treasure that surpassed the visualization realm, but in the end it still couldn't resist and was destroyed. If a visualization realm evolver were to charge in, he would die without a doubt. This was a land of death. Qin Luoyin twisted her waist and swung her long legs. At the same time, she stretched out her lustrous arms. The trajectory of her movements was extremely beautiful. Her entire person was like an ancient witch, and the dream dance she danced was as though she were offering sacrifices and praying. It was extremely gentle, beautiful, and filled with a sense of mystery. Boom! One could see that her small waist was forcefully stopped when the domain runes collided with it. An ancient witchcraft glow appeared on her lustrous white skin. This dance is truly evil. Chu Feng was even more astonished. In truth, Qin Luoyin's heart was heavy. She didn't even know what kind of price she would have to pay for such a dance. She wasn't flustered even at such a critical juncture. Her slender body moved, and the multicolored lights danced in the air. She became increasingly beautiful, and her entire body was covered in a layer of holy radiance. Qin Luoyin, catch! Chu Feng shouted. With a swoosh, he tossed over a long spear which stabbed into the ground with a bang. It was given to Qin Luoyin. Just treat it as a pole and keep dancing. I like pole dancing. Qin Luoyin's delicate face was filled with anger and killing intent after hearing this. She revealed an incomparably cold expression. She naturally knew that the other party was deliberately humiliating her and ruining her mental state. Chu Feng, do you think you can survive by ambushing me with domains? You'll die very soon. This is the purgatory. Unless the saints of my damning pure land open the gates of the purgatory, all life on this land will be extinguished. If you want to live, you can enter my damning pure land and serve me. Qin Luoyin's voice slowed down as she gazed at Chu Feng. Keep dancing. I'm admiring it and can't be bothered to listen to you. I don't want to enter your damning pure land to be your husband, replied Chu Feng indifferently. Qin Luoyin circulated her breathing technique to maintain a clear mind and calm her emotions. Afterwards, her body erupted with multicolored light as she spun about. She was using a special movement technique from the dream dance in an attempt to break free from the spatial restraint. The space is warping. There's something to it, but it's better if you keep it inside the domain. Chu Feng sneered after seeing this. All kinds of magnetic stones flew out from his hand like raindrops and pressed forward. In the blink of an eye, the densely packed domain patterns interweaved together and enveloped the entire area. Qin Luoyin coughed up a large mouthful of blood and fell from the void. She fell head first onto the ground. Apparently, she had suffered serious injuries. The domain had been activated to its full extent and formed a terrifying suppression. You've fallen limp to the ground so quickly. Tell me, should I sell you off or keep you to warm my bed? Or should I take revenge first and bite your tongue? Chu Feng ridiculed with a smile on his face. Everyone says you're the goddess in the hearts of all the young evolvers. Is there such a thing? Then I'll reluctantly accept a female servant. This way, I'll be able to walk through the starry skies with much face. Chapter 607. Chu Feng was intimidating Qin Luoyin in such a manner because he hoped her state of mind would deteriorate and he would capture and kill her as soon as possible. He could see that although the other party had fallen to the ground, she hadn't lost her combat strength and was still waiting for a counterattack. Chu Feng increased the stakes and once again brought out the magnetic stones to construct a complex domain. At this moment, the domain had reached 13 layers. Little girl, enjoy it slowly. I'll roast meat and drink wine outside. I'll watch you break the domains while eating. Chu Feng shouted. Actually, he couldn't roast because he wanted to vomit at the sight of those things. Qin Luoyin's expression was ice-cold. The colorful dress around her body emitted a tearing sound. She knew that the other party was doing this on purpose to humiliate her and throw her into disorder. From there, she would fall into a desperate situation where she would be killed or captured alive. Chu Feng, you're courting death. Once I escape, you'll become a servant of the damning Pure Land. Everyone will be able to order you around. Crack! A large part of her glowing dress was torn apart, exposing her snow-white skin. The domain runes were too dense, and were strangling her even as she spoke. Kill! Chu Feng realized that this woman still had a trump card and wasn't easy to kill. He didn't hold back and perfected all 13 domains to their peak state. Then, he began to strangle her. He was now a domain master. It could be said that his methods were outstanding. If he was given enough time to set up a domain, he would definitely be able to kill large groups of visualization-level evolvers. At the same time, he could also kill experts of a higher realm. There was nothing he couldn't kill within the domain. One had to know that he was only at the visualization realm, yet he could kill the enemy with just his domain alone. It could be considered a world-shaking feat. Chu Feng had long since realized that his domain talent was superior to his evolutionary talent and needed to be excavated. From now on, he would have to fly with both wings. Whether it was domains or evolution, he would have to spend a lot of time cultivating them. Boom! The densely packed domain runes were like a river of stars shining brightly. One star after another connected and rotated to form a magnificent scene. Chu Feng pushed his domain to its limit. This was also the maximum power he could muster at the moment. He even felt that he could kill evolvers 2 realms above the visualization realm. This was his confidence. After researching domains, he was able to transform the power of mountains, rivers, and all living things for his own use. He could restrain the enemy and kill the strong with the weak. As expected, Qin Luoyin's energy was terrifying. She was like a small boat in the vast ocean, about to capsize at any moment. Let's see how you survive this time. Chu Feng was convinced that this kind of domain could kill someone 2 realms higher than him. Boom! The 6 weapons around Qin Luoyin exploded. They were all powerful secret treasures, but they shattered in the blink of an eye. They couldn't withstand the domain's suppression. This was a land of death. Dang! A large black bell appeared and enveloped Qin Luoyin's head. It temporarily blocked the sea of domain runes and bought her some time. The secret treasure of the Dao clan? It still won't work. Chu Feng shouted. He kept a close eye on the changes in the domain and would immediately repair it once there was a flaw or a crack in the magnetic stone. The jet-black bell emitted a dazzling radiance. There was a vague figure of an old Taoist on it, buzzing and emitting the unique sound of the Tao clan's scriptures. It won't work no matter which race's secret treasure. Die! Chu Feng shouted. The domain was activated, and the black bell exploded with a boom. It could no longer protect Qin Luoyin's body. The black metal fragments turned into black light and were soon destroyed. However, Qin Luoyin had bought her some time to activate a forbidden secret technique and successfully use it. This was the damning breathing technique's forbidden domain. This time, not only did she hypnotize all the cells in her body to release their boundless potential, but she also hypnotized her own spiritual will to erupt with terrifying power. She seemed to have become a different person. Her cells flowed with dazzling light and formed an armor-like energy barrier on the surface of her body. At the same time, her eyes were lifeless at first, but then they suddenly became pitch black and empty. Next, they shot out beams of light like the sun. It was incomparably terrifying. Kill without mercy. Her voice was cold and indistinct, completely different from before. This was a fundamental change. Her actions, habits, and even her temperament were worlds apart. At this moment, she was like a female Azura, cold and emotionless. There was almost no human emotion in her eyes, and her whole body was glowing like a god. This was the damning Pure Land's forbidden domain. Not only could they enter other people's dreams to kill, but they could also enter their own dreams and hypnotize both the physical and spiritual body to release the most primitive power. The orthodoxy believed that there was a peerlessly powerful demon in everyone's heart. Once released, it would tear the world apart and bring about a great calamity. People would never release a demon after imprisoning it. The damning Pure Land, on the other hand, had a way to release this primordial demonic venerable and have it come out to fight. It would erupt with even more terrifying power than usual. Of course, this would cause great damage to oneself. Sometimes, one might not even be able to drive the demon back and allow the demonic self in the heart to take over everything. Additionally, the damage to the physical and spiritual body was also terrifying. It might even cause one's body to collapse completely. If given a choice, the people of the damning Pure Land wouldn't use this forbidden domain secret technique. This was truly a method of killing 1,000 enemies with 800 casualties. It could even be considered a method of mutual destruction. Qin Luoyin had released the demonic venerable in her heart. This was her demonified self, and in the blink of an eye, her aura was astonishingly terrifying. She was dancing. This was a forbidden domain secret technique, and it was completely different from the dance from before. It was very much like the dance of the most powerful ancient shaman tribe. In the blink of an eye, the power of time seemed to circulate as various primordial scenes appeared. As expected, Qin Luoyin was erupting with terrifying energy aura. She was no longer herself and was controlled by the demon in her heart as she fought against the domain runes. It was as if all kinds of nuclear weapons were exploding in this area. Mushroom clouds blossomed one after the other as radioactive materials pierced through the void. The scene was terrifying. One had to know that this was the energy being emitted by a person of flesh and blood. Boom! An intense collision ensued as 13 layers of domain runes interweaved and suppressed Qin Luoyin. The damning Pure Land's descendant was cold and emotionless. Her eyes were like golden suns with scenes of the destruction of the heavens and the collapse of the starry river within. Her heart was only filled with merciless slaughter. Bang! An area of domain runes was destroyed as her lustrous arms streaked through the void. Boom! Following which, another area of domain runes exploded as her snow-white feet stepped forward. Her movements were very graceful as she danced the shaman's dance. This was the damning Pure Land's forbidden art. Combined with her breathing technique, she was able to display a mysterious body art. In truth, both her body and spirit were dancing at this moment, but it was a dance of destruction. 2 realms higher than the visualization realm. Chu Feng was shaken. He had seen through the other party's state. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to resist his 13 layers of domains. This was somewhat heaven-defying. Qin Luoyin had used a forbidden domain technique to raise herself by 1 realm. Who would be able to endure such a sudden change in power when fighting against an evenly matched opponent? Crack! Later on, the additional domains Chu Feng had added cracked and showed signs of collapsing. You'll die today no matter what. Chu Feng's gaze was cold. He could see that the other party's state wasn't right. He might be able to win if he were to persevere, but the other party might not be able to hold on. But he didn't want to be so passive because everything was full of uncertainty. He wanted to control everything. For this reason, Chu Feng was using all of his domain technique. He wanted to link the 12 most important domains into one and construct a small 8 trigrams furnace domain. This was a fusion technique for domains, a fusion of 12 layers into one furnace. Qin Luoyin's multicolored dress was torn in many places. Her body was as white as suet jade, and she was tall and lustrous. It was just that she was incomparably cold at the moment and was emitting a shocking aura. Bang! She danced and slapped out with her palm, completely shattering the 13th domain. Those domain runes couldn't get close to her body and were obliterated by a mysterious light before her shaman dance. At this moment, she was dancing and would rise into the air from time to time. She couldn't really fly in this space, but she kept crossing the sky, charging up and dancing in circles. Every time she did so, it was as though she were flying. This was a power 2 realms above the visualization realm. In this area, she was like a valkyrie about to destroy everything in her way. Rise! Finally, Chu Feng succeeded. He tossed out a large number of magnetic stones and changed the landscape. He fused the remaining 12 domains together and constructed an 8 trigrams furnace domain. Rumble! This area was different now. All kinds of domain runes merged together and surged. In the end, a glowing furnace appeared from the ground and enveloped the area, sucking Qin Luoyin inside. Clang! Even though it was constructed from runes and was almost materialized, there was still the metallic sound of the lid closing. It was too real. Boom! Qin Luoyin attacked. The demon in her heart took control of her body and hypnotized herself. Boundless energy bombarded the divine furnace. Kill! Chu Feng shouted. For a moment, the densely packed domain runes within the furnace turned into sword radiance and slashed at Qin Luoyin. Streaks of blood appeared on Qin Luoyin's body. She had been injured by the sword radiance formed from domain runes, and it wasn't light at all. Incinerate! Chu Feng shouted once again. At this time, he was gasping for breath because he was personally involved. He was using his mind to control the 8 trigrams furnace domain instead of letting it operate on its own. He wanted to kill Qin Luoyin immediately to avoid any accident. That was because the other party had too many trump cards. He was afraid of some mishap. Inside the 8 trigrams furnace, 8 different spots were emitting flames that surged and burned fiercely. Ah! Qin Luoyin, who had released the demon in her heart, groaned in pain. She was enduring the flames that could tear her body apart and might be destroyed. Bang! When the 8 flames merged into one and turned into a beam of light, a large hole appeared on her body. She had been burned through by the flames. This result was shocking. At this time, Chu Feng had already draped his monastic robes over his shoulders. That was because he wasn't sure if he could effectively kill the other party within the 8 trigrams furnace. He had made preparations for the worst, but now it seemed he didn't need to risk his life. Kill! Chu Feng shouted. A sword engraved with 8 trigrams runes flew out from within the 8 trigrams furnace and slashed down with a swoosh. With a puff, the peerless beauty was cut in half at the waist with a flash of blood. Chapter 608. Chu Feng's tense body relaxed at this moment. No matter how stunning the damning Pure Land's descendant was, she had already been cut in half at the waist. She had lost her combat power and could no longer cause any trouble. He stood nearby and gazed at the 8 trigrams furnace. There seemed to be streams of molten iron flowing through the ravines on the desolate land, illuminating the night sky. This was the trajectory of the domain on the ground. It had condensed runes and then interweaved in the void to form a furnace. This furnace was sparkling and translucent. It didn't appear out of thin air but was formed from earth chi and energy. It appeared on the ground and enveloped Qin Luoyin. Even though she had been cut in half at the waist, she was still cold and merciless with a demonic temperament. Her snow-white body was stained with blood and appeared somewhat unyielding and bewitching. The most famous goddesses in the starry skies had never met such a miserable end. Today she was about to be executed. Even though Qin Luoyin was being led by the demon in her heart and not her own will, she still felt that she was about to die. Her eyes became increasingly cold as black flames danced around her body. That was the final struggle of the demon in her heart. It wanted to perish indiscriminately. "Go on your way," Chu Feng said calmly. He didn't want any unforeseen events to happen. He felt that this damning Pure Land descendant was indeed powerful and had endless trump cards. Most importantly, this woman was ruthless despite her peerless charm. She would surely deal him a fatal blow once the opportunity presented itself. To be safe, he had to kill her and get rid of all future troubles. Clang! A green spear condensed within the translucent 8 trigrams furnace. Then, it whistled through the air and dived down with a swoosh. Blood splattered as the spear pierced through Qin Luoyin's beautiful forehead and nailed her to death. At this moment, Qin Luoyin's originally sexy lips parted involuntarily. She was just as gorgeous as before and her entire body emitted a final divine radiance. Afterward, her extremely intelligent and purple gem-like eyes dimmed down. Chu Feng didn't walk over or approach her. That was because a saint's spiritual seed had appeared in Qin Luoyin's body during the battle at Mount Kunlun. It had helped her endure the calamity of spiritual collapse. Ashes to ashes, earth to earth. I'll send you to the afterlife and take a stroll on the path of reincarnation. We'll fight again in the next life if fate permits it. Chu Feng looked at her and then at the distant city of death. He then activated the 8 trigrams furnace domain, causing the sky to burn with raging flames. At his level, even if his head was chopped off, he might not be able to kill him completely. He could allow his spirit to permeate his entire body, not necessarily staying in his head. As such, he produced this domain's 8 trigrams flame in order to burn Qin Luoyin to ashes and put an end to all troubles. The flames throbbed and the interior of the furnace became resplendent. 8 raging flames throbbed and transformed into 8 types of symbols that revolved like the 8 trigrams as they drowned Qin Luoyin. Qin Luoyin's slender figure was glaring amidst the flames. Her entire body was gushing with multicolored light. There was still exuberant vitality in her body even after being severed at the waist. She was instinctively protecting herself. However, she clearly couldn't hold on any longer. She was about to completely disappear into thin air, her name erased from this world. Something's wrong. Chu Feng frowned and looked around. The world was pitch black, and only this place was resplendent. Flames overflowed into the sky, and no other creatures appeared. But why did he feel uneasy? This kind of situation had long since shown signs. He had already sensed it when he was using his domain against Qin Luoyin, but it wasn't very obvious. Afterward, a wisp of blue light appeared between the heaven and earth. It was both strange and astonishing. Previously, this place was too secluded with nothing but deathly stillness. But now, a bewitching blue light had actually appeared. Afterward, it became somewhat clear and extended over from the ground. Chu Feng was bewildered. He opened his fiery eyes and saw everything clearly. It was like a blue wave surging toward him, but it wasn't violent at all. It was rather gentle, like the rustling of spring rain, nourishing everything silently. The blue light was clear and sparkling with an intoxicating luster. It was like a ground full of rolling blue diamonds as it approached. Chu Feng felt increasingly uneasy. He wanted to hide and leave this place in an instant, but he discovered that it wasn't just in one direction but in all directions. Even the meteorites in the sky were the same. Blue light poured down in torrents from the firmament. For a moment it seemed as though there were many small blue rivers flowing in the air, and there were even many waterfalls cascading down. What were these, like flourishing fireworks? Chu Feng's body tensed up as he put on the top-notch battle armor he had seized from the divine son of the outer realm. In addition, there was also a spiritual armor ringing within his body, protecting the spiritual energy that had taken human form. Chu Feng, you little evil creature. You've provoked a great disaster. Release me or we'll all die here. At this time, the 8 trigrams furnace transmitted a spiritual fluctuation. This clearly wasn't Qin Luoyin's. It contained a contemptuous attitude and a kind of resentment. Chu Feng immediately understood that Qin Luoyin still had a saint's spiritual seed within her body. She was quite patient. She had restrained herself even after seeing Qin Luoyin cut in half and nailed to the head. But now, she couldn't sit still any longer. Old witch, scram to the side and wait for your death. No, I'll send you on your way as soon as possible. Chu Feng said coldly as he activated the furnace's flames with all his might. Do you know where this place is? It's a terrifying purgatory. Rumor has it that it can bury the entire universe. No matter how powerful the characters are, they'll all die if they dare move. The saint of damning Pure Land sighed with intense hatred. She was a saint of a generation, but now she was helpless. Even if her main body had the ability to transcend the heavens, she was only a spiritual seed at this moment and couldn't display it. I don't care. I'll send you on your way even if I die here. How could I have fallen here if it wasn't for you shamelessly attacking me in secret? Chu Feng rebuked as the furnace's flames burned even more vigorously. Qin Luoyin's body was suffering from the pain of destruction. If you don't act rashly, this purgatory space will only be purified once every 2 or 3 months. Now that the reincarnation flames have appeared, you won't be able to endure it. You'll die without a doubt. Reincarnation flames? Chu Feng looked at the approaching blue flames. They were too sparkling, translucent, and dazzling. There was a kind of bewitching beauty to them. Old Demoness, you should worry about yourself. You guys go on your way first. Chu Feng urged on the furnace's flames. At the same time, he was moved and rapidly made arrangements. He split the furnace into 2 and turned it into a yin and yang furnace. One side was a land of extinction, burning Qin Luoyin and the saint's spiritual seed. The other side was filled with vitality and incomparably auspicious. Chu Feng rushed in and hid within the yang furnace. It was filled with vitality and protected his body. The yin furnace on the other side had turned into a land of death. Although the flames inside were very bright, they were fatal. It could be called a yin furnace, a dead furnace. I swear that if Luoyin dies here, my main body will find a way to personally come to Earth one day and slaughter your entire family and friends. The damning Pure Lands saint said hatefully. F***ck off. Chu Feng didn't like this at all. He made the furnace shine even more resplendent. His yang furnace was depriving the other side of vitality, while the yin furnace was becoming more and more miserable. The damning Pure Land saint was very obedient and really scram. Her spiritual seed exploded and turned into a wave of the purest energy. It spread out to protect Qin Luoyin's damaged body and buy time for her. At this moment, The blue flames danced about and extended forward to cover the entire area. It was really gentle, like flawless ocean spray with a dreamy blue splendor. From time to time, it would shatter like a crystal, translucent and full of texture. Boom! But when it came into contact with the 8 trigrams yin-yang furnace, the entire place shook violently. It wanted to cut off all vitality and destroy everything here. Even though Chu Feng's attainments in the field of domains were profound, the furnace he had constructed couldn't stop it. The blue light rushed in and spread out to cover the entire area. In the blink of an eye, his entire being became restless. He was filled with battle intent and a destructive impulse. He wanted to tear the void apart. No, this isn't my instinct. I'm being controlled by a wave of emotions. It's caused by the blue flames. It has seeped into the 8 trigrams furnace and affected me. Chu Feng was horrified. His consciousness was restless and filled with uneasiness. He couldn't help but want to swing his fists and fight to the death. This kind of thought couldn't be restrained after it arose. At the same time, he heard the sound of domain runes collapsing. The blue flames didn't destroy the magnetic stones he had laid down immediately. Instead, they gradually advanced like the nourishment of the spring rain. Following which, he felt his body about to be torn apart. The blue flames seemed gentle, but once they approached his body, they would disintegrate him and turn him into dust. This was the reincarnation flames, and it was only at the initial stage. It was already like this before the true destructive power descended. Don't tell me I'm going to die here? Chu Feng sighed as cracks appeared on the surface of his body. Even though it was only at the beginning, he couldn't endure the most gentle flames and was about to be burned away. Suddenly, his chest heated up. The side of the mountain and river diagram in the stone box was glowing. It was sparkling and translucent, and it immediately calmed his restless heart. Additionally, his body was no longer in pain. His flesh and blood didn't split apart even when the flames approached him. On the other side, something shocking was happening within the Yin furnace. Qin Luoyin's body was being burned, and now that the blue flames were spreading, the situation became even more serious. She was about to be destroyed in both body and soul. But at the last moment, a dazzling radiance soared up from her body and transformed into a resplendent rain of light which enveloped her in an instant. Buzz! The rain of light surged with astonishing vitality. Within a split second, the wound on her forehead healed and completely disappeared. Following which, her severed body joined back together and regrew. Her flesh and blood were regenerated and became snow-white, exquisite and translucent. The spiritual flames were also throbbing as she actually recovered completely. Death Substitution Talisman. This peerlessly rare divine talisman was taking effect. It protected her and gave her a second life, allowing her to come back to life. Moreover, this kind of dense vitality helped her dissolve the killing intent of the blue flames. Bang! All of a sudden, the yin-yang 8 trigrams furnace exploded and Chu Feng and Qin Luoyin fell out. At this point, the domains were completely destroyed. Chu Feng looked up at the sky. Man proposes, but God disposes. What kind of damned reincarnation flame was this? It changed everything and turned all his efforts into flowing water. After falling outside, Chu Feng discovered that his domains were still quite effective. That was because at this moment, he deeply understood how terrifying the restlessness in his heart was. His killing intent soared and he couldn't help but want to fight again. This time, it was even more intense than before. The stone box on his chest glowed and once again calmed him down. But it was different for Qin Luoyin. Even though the death substitution talisman had revived her and preserved her life, she had lost control of her spirit and emotions. She was greatly affected by the blue flames. She let out a soft shout and surged with magic power. Energy boiled over and was simply about to destroy this place. Following which, her eyes emitted a blue glow as she attacked frantically. Chu Feng was shaken and evaded. That originally peerless beauty seemed to have gone mad. Her temperament had changed and was incomparably berserk. She shattered the earth with a raise of her hand and then smashed the meteors in the air. She even attacked the blue flames. Chu Feng was also affected by her and became increasingly restless. His heart was surging with battle intent, but he knew he couldn't approach that woman. In the end, he let out a loud roar and ran to the other side to erupt with power. The two attacked countless times and encountered each other along the way. Chu Feng evaded each time because he didn't want to suffer a great loss. The other party's current state wasn't right. She was 2 realms higher than him. Before long, the blue flames were still as gentle as before, but the two stopped at the same time. They were incomparably delighted and couldn't control themselves. Afterward, they couldn't stop laughing. This was especially true for Qin Luoyin. Her bell-like laughter filled the entire area. It was very pleasant to listen to, like the sounds of nature, but it was too strange. She was laughing without end. Her eyes were blue and it was obvious that she had lost control of her emotions. Chu Feng was also in the same state. He was incomparably happy in his heart, but he still had a clear mind. He knew this wasn't right. He was about to die in purgatory, so how could he laugh so happily? Even he was like this with the protection of the stone box. One could well imagine what Qin Luoyin's condition was like. Even worse. Especially when her demonic side had appeared. She had always been particular about indulging herself and doing as she pleased. Therefore, she couldn't control her demonic side at all. Chu Feng was scared. He understood that the reincarnation flame was going to purify this space in the end and destroy all creatures that had entered by mistake. It had to be done step by step. Now, it had touched one's spirit and unraveled the 7 emotions and 6 desires of the human body. As expected, his mood changed again after an unknown period of time. It was no longer joyful but instead full of hatred. He looked at Qin Luoyin with extreme disdain. In the distance, Qin Luoyin was even more outrageous. She hated every rock and everything she saw. She emitted a rain of light and wrapped herself in it. She was incomparably narcissistic and only loved herself. Afterward, Chu Feng decisively ran away. Goddamn it, it was too unbearable. Once the 7 emotions and 6 desires surged, he wanted to cry, laugh, and kill. But he reckoned he would suffer a great loss when facing a ruthless person 2 realms higher than him. The only fortunate thing was that Qin Luoyin was controlled by her emotions. Moreover, it was her demonic side that was in control. She wasn't clear-headed at all and had forgotten that there was a great enemy here. One could see a beautiful woman whose clothes had been burned by the blue flames. Her body was lustrous and slender, and her graceful figure was crying and laughing. She was happy and hateful at the same time. From time to time, she would even attack and shatter the meteorites. The death substitution talisman on her body was glowing and could restore her vitality. However, it couldn't stop the problem of losing control of her emotions. In the end, Chu Feng discovered that his breathing had become coarse and his whole body was hot. An irrepressible impulse had arisen. He knew that this was the rising desire of the 6 desires of kinship. However, with the stone box on him and his powerful willpower, he could easily suppress it. Suddenly, he shivered. Daydreaming girl, what do you want? I don't have time to fight to the death with you now. Go away. Chu Feng berated. He had discovered Qin Luoyin at the end of the horizon. He felt a bit guilty because the 2 of them weren't in a good state. It would be too unjust if they were to be killed here. One had to know that he had once held the absolute advantage. You're really bold and unrestrained. You don't even wear clothes? Chu Feng's eyes flickered and emitted a faint blue splendor. At the end of the desolate land, a glowing body was approaching. It was like a suet jade. Chapter 609. However, Qin Luoyin, who was walking over from the horizon, didn't listen to his warning at all. Her beautiful blue eyes were inexplicably bewitching and full of mystery. Her light purple hair was smooth and supple as it hung down naturally. Her skin was as white as snow, and her whole body was lustrous and enchanting as she approached. It was undeniable that she was extremely beautiful, especially in this state. She gracefully stepped on the desolate earth like a spirit of the mountains walking out of the wilderness and into the world of mortals. But she was also dangerous. The demonic Qin Luoyin was in the lead, and was surrounded by the blue flames of reincarnation. She had dug out the dam of the 7 emotions and 6 desires, and could cause trouble at any time. "Stop!" shouted Chu Feng. He naturally knew that there was something wrong with the other party. Because of the flames of reincarnation, her emotions had been manipulated and she couldn't control herself. Qin Luoyin turned a deaf ear to him. After seeing Chu Feng, the blue light in her eyes became even more intense. It was as though 2 clear springs had transformed into azure moons, somewhat misty and intoxicating. Then, she floated over like a specter. Swoosh! Chu Feng decisively took out an item and threw it at her. Then, he turned around and ran. It was a violet heavenly thunder crystal he had dug out from Qin Luoyin's trap and kept for his own use. Now, he tossed it out and threw it at its original owner. Boom! Thunderbolt clear sky. A great explosion occurred behind him as the ground turned into magma and gushed high into the sky. At the same time, lightning and blue flames accompanied the scene, creating a terrifying scene. Although Qin Luoyin's emotions were fluctuating violently and she had already lost control, her combat instincts were still there. Her senses were abnormally sharp, and it was too difficult to kill her. She was currently 2 levels higher than Chu Feng. She soared into the air and broke through the sound barrier to evade the attack. Even though she couldn't fly in this space, she was almost flying in the sky. She lightly tapped on a meteorite in midair with her snow-white, sparkling toe. Like an otherworldly fairy, her whole body was suffused with a snow-white radiance as she flew towards Chu Feng. With a swoosh, Qin Luoyin swooped down and arrived in front of Chu Feng. His expression changed, and he used the world's end near at hand. He moved his body horizontally and quickly dodged the attack. After that, he decisively took out the black talisman and was about to run. A black light flashed. He held the talisman in his hand and was indeed flying high up in the sky. However, he only flew a short distance before the blue flames in the sky pressed down like a sea of stars. It was extremely majestic and slapped him down, smashing him into the ground. Chu Feng's expression suddenly changed. What was going on? The talisman paper should have been able to take him flying, but now it was being suppressed. In that instant, he felt uneasy, feeling that things weren't good. The purgatory wanted to purify this entire space. Not even holding a black symbol paper engraved with a special symbol was enough. The symbols refined by a certain unmatched existence in the outside world were useless. As a matter of fact, the ghost town was currently radiating with boundless blue light. Within the town, the giant millstone had already stopped rotating. Dozens of golden symbols shone at the same time as terrifying blue flames surged up from there. Following which, the colors of the flames changed to green, purple, silver, gold, scarlet, and so on. They were gorgeous and vigorous as they spread outwards. This was a mutation caused by the dozens of golden symbols within the millstone. It wanted to purify the entire purgatory space. There was only one symbol on the heaven-defying black talisman paper. As a result, it was suppressed here and couldn't fly or burrow into the ground. After landing on the ground, Chu Feng turned around and ran. Even though the damning Pure Land descendant behind him was exceptionally graceful and her entire body was as exquisite as suet jade, Chu Feng wasn't in the mood to appreciate her beauty. He didn't want to tangle with her. That was because the demonic Qin Luoyin was dangerous at this moment. She might launch the Viper's Kiss and deal a fatal blow at every turn. Boom! Qin Luoyin chased after him. Her speed was too fast, and the air exploded as she directly caught up to Chu Feng. A snow-white radiance flashed in midair, and she arrived in front of him. Chu Feng quickly changed directions and forcefully changed directions. At this speed of many times the speed of sound, ordinary creatures would instantly disintegrate if they changed their trajectory like this. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Chu Feng left behind one afterimage after another as he moved about this desolate land. From time to time, he would switch positions from one place to another. But the woman behind him was too fast. "Can't you be a bit more reserved? Is there any meaning in running around with your butt bare?" Chu Feng transmitted his spirit and mocked the damning Pure Land descendant. He sensed the peculiarity more and more and felt deeply uneasy. The other party couldn't control herself and was treating him as prey. That should be the rise of the 7 emotions and 6 sensory pleasures. "I'm telling you, I won't submit even if you beat me to death." Chu Feng shouted and immediately ran away. If the other young evolvers in the universe heard this, they would definitely be speechless for a while. Then, they would sigh with emotion. This demon could really act for a long time. In the eyes of others, she was the famous 6th peerless beauty under the starry skies and the goddess in the hearts of the young evolvers of all races. She was chasing after him in such a charming and gentle manner, yet he was running away. He really deserved to be struck by lightning. It was just that Chu Feng knew very well that there would be all sorts of variables once the two became entangled. If the other party were to become clear-headed or go into other emotions at the crucial moment, such as anger or killing intent, she might slap him to death. That would be too unjust. Buzz. The void trembled. Qin Luoyin's feet didn't touch the ground, and she was almost flying through the air. She was 3 inches above the ground, her snow-white, sparkling toes glowing without a speck of dust on them. Her entire body was flawless. "Oh my, she's catching up again." Chu Feng decisively threw out a second violet heavenly thunder crystal to blast the beautiful figure behind him. Boom! Magma boiled once again as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The scene behind him was incomparably terrifying, as though the end of the world had arrived. However, this was simply useless. Qin Luoyin was 2 realms higher than him and possessed the aptitude to be unrivaled. Her body was soft and agile as though she were performing a shaman dance. She changed directions in the blink of an eye and circled around him before giving chase once more. Chu Feng looked back and felt a headache coming on. The damning Pure Land descendant's beautiful purple hair danced in the wind as she appeared before him once more. He simply couldn't shake her off. "I'm Yao Yao's, don't chase me!" shouted Chu Feng as he ran madly. His old face turned slightly red as he said these words. He was actually afraid of a devastatingly beautiful woman chasing after him today. "Little thief, you're too shameless." The saint's spiritual seed in Qin Luoyin's body originally still had a wisp of energy that hadn't been truly extinguished. But after hearing these words, that wisp of spirit was so angry that it turned into flowing light and completely dissipated. "I'm also Linoy's. You stay on the side," shouted Chu Feng as his feet landed on the ground. Every step would bring him more than 10 kilometers into the air. He was simply too fast, as though he was teleporting. However, the figure behind him was closing in and locking onto him. Her lily-white hands were about to touch his shoulder. Boom! Breaking through the sound barrier, Chu Feng changed directions continuously. In a short period of several tens of kilometers, he had changed directions several hundred times in one breath. Even someone as powerful as him was in severe pain. This could easily lead to the collapse of his body. In the end, Chu Feng grinned and sucked in a breath of cold air. He had never slowed down under this extreme speed and had instead changed directions constantly. Even he couldn't bear it as cracks appeared on his body. At this moment, Qin Luoyin's beautiful purple hair danced in the wind not far behind him. Her slender body looked as though it had been carved out of ivory, fair, exquisite, and glowing with luster. Her figure was graceful as she flew through the air like a fairy of the moon who had been burned by hellfire. Her clothes were completely destroyed and her entire body was snow white as she stepped through the void. At this moment, her beautiful eyes were bright blue and her flawless cheeks carried a peculiar charm. Her legs were slender and perfectly straight. She advanced with great agility, but her speed was extremely fast. She caught up in the blink of an eye and raised her hand to grab Chu Feng. "Don't touch me. I, Chu Feng, belong to the entire earth. It has nothing to do with you." Chu Feng's palm glowed as he gave her a direct slap, erupting with blinding energy. Then, he was brushed away by the demonic Qin Luoyin's fair hand and his entire arm went numb. The difference in realms was too great. Is the monastic robe no longer effective? Wormhole Express, goddammit, you guys aren't reliable either. Then, Chu Feng went all out. Although the other party's eyes were burning with passion, he knew that this was just a facade. Who knew when she would wake up and give him a slap? Rumble. He unleashed all kinds of trump cards. He circulated his breathing technique, followed by the resonance and spiral technique. Then, his own picture scroll appeared in order to confine this woman. However, Qin Luoyin was like the reincarnation of a true immortal. She was invincible after using the woo-woo and simply couldn't be injured. At this moment, her skin was like ice and her bones were like jade. Her entire body was exquisite and lustrous like a celestial immortal as she soared through the air. She wasn't afraid of Chu Feng's attacks at all. Moreover, Chu Feng would be sent flying with every slap. His body was on the verge of collapse as he suffered violent collisions. At this moment, the descendant of the damning Pure Land was crushing everything in her path with a stance 2 realms higher. She was unstoppable and invincible. She traversed through the air, and could truly be called a goddess traversing the skies. Bang! Chu Feng staggered from the attack, and was then confined. A pure white radiance was emitted from Qin Luoyin's body. This was a kind of domain that fixed him in place. He was completely helpless. In the end, he was actually the one who had fallen into the other party's hands. At this moment, the entire purgatory space was azure, but strands of other colors gradually appeared at the end of the horizon. This made Qin Luoyin's state increasingly abnormal. Even Chu Feng himself was breathing rapidly. He felt his 7 emotions and 6 sensory pleasures going out of control. Crack! The top-notch armor on his body actually cracked under a light slap from Qin Luoyin, who was 2 realms higher than him. Then, it exploded and the metal pieces flew in all directions. Afterward, he felt a warm aura. That was the breath of the damning Pure Land descendant. It was very ambiguous and overly intimate. With a bang, he was pushed to the ground and fell headfirst onto the desolate ground. Chu Feng belongs to the entire universe. He shouted at the last moment with an indescribably complicated feeling. Then, a snow-white, jade-like foot stepped on his body. Following that, a flawless, lustrous white body approached him. The place was getting increasingly hot. Blue flames covered the area and covered it in a haze. 2 people could vaguely be seen within. Before long, Chu Feng realized a serious problem. When he returned from the path of reincarnation, he had recognized his relatives along the way. 90% of them were, "My uncle is Chu Feng." The other 10% were, "My brother is Chu Feng." At this moment, he was dumbfounded. That path required more than half a month to reach the end, but the super soul bodies he had engraved had spread all the way. Some people could definitely make it in time to reincarnate. There were even people who were hurrying on their way after a few days. Chu Feng immediately froze in place. He looked at Qin Luoyin, who was just inches away from him, and couldn't help but shiver. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "One of those bastards better not reincarnate as my descendant. At that time, I'll #yen%#." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.